Hey, Michael,
Hey, Rich.
you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Oh, did you catch anything the other night? Oh, I can't hear you.
I think we might be recorded right now.
Oh, okay.
Hey, John.
Hey, Michael.
I was telling Rich, I think we might be recorded right now. I know they're definitely going to start recording when the board meeting starts, but I'm
Right.
going to put myself on mute.
Yeah, I put myself on mute a minute ago. I'll go back.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. And let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mrs. Keller, can you lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, now I'd like to ask for a moment of silent prayer or personal reflection. Thank you. All right, now we have a board member who was re-elected to their position, so he's going to take the oath of office.
Yes, that'd
Next,
be me.
that's you, Mr. Hessney.
Where should I go?
Just a minute. Let's get right over here.
Raise your right hand and please recite.
I, Paul Hessney, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New York, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of Olean Board of Education trustee according to the best of my ability.
Congratulations, Paul.
Thank you.
Indeed.
All right, I would look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Mary.
I'll second.
Thank you, Julio. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We have quite a list of commendations tonight, which is kind of exciting. The boys tennis team played in the team sectional finals. The girls varsity softball team played in the B1 sectional finals. Track sectionals was held last weekend, and we had some success there as well. The high school awards breakfast, there were two of them because there were so many kids that got awards. That was last week. The music boosters had their banquet last week. The sports boosters had their banquet, and grade 7 had their recognition as well. I think last Friday that was. And Friday also was the exceptional track and field day down at the middle school for all our special athletes down there. One other thing I did see in the paper today,
That's
or
right.
yesterday, was O'Connell.
Yep.
What's it?
McKenna.
Anna O'Connell. Yep, she was the student of the week for Cattaraugus County. All right.
May I add a couple?
Absolutely.
All right, so we do have just a couple other things. I wanted to say thank you to Siemens for allowing us to use your parking area for the exceptional track and field day that we just talked about. They graciously permitted us to park there, and we could not have done it without you, so thank you. And I'd like to recognize our retirees. from this year, last year, and from 2020. And we just came back from a reception where we got a chance to recognize them. And being in that room with all of them, you could feel the power. These are folks who have dedicated their lives to the betterment of our district, to our students, to our staff, their colleagues. It was just a wonderful place to be. And it was also really wonderful to finally have an opportunity, especially for those who retired the last 2 years, to be recognized. And as one spouse said, to have their closure that they never really had before. And it was a beautiful event. So we want to put them on our commendation list. And I'm just going to preemptively also add on our tenure candidates that we are recognizing them this evening, as well as our DEI committee. And there's just so many good things happening in our district. Our list could go on and on, but I yield the floor,
All
sir.
right. Thank you. Yep, that was a great event for the retirees. Yeah. Communications, we didn't have anything to speak of in the last couple of weeks. Discussion items. The DEI work group has come here tonight to present to us on some of the things that they've been discussing. So Jen Kless, I'm going to have you introduce.
And as they're making their way down, I have only had the opportunity to work with this committee since January, but it's an amazing amount of work on some very heady topics. They have just, with full force, gone forward, talking about things, trying to set the stage for profound improvement in our district. And it hasn't been easy. And the group has grown. We increased our inclusion, so to speak, and had a greater diversity to the people who were at the table talking about where our needs were, where we need to make improvements. And I have to say, first of all, it takes a lot of strength just to say and be able to admit where our problems are and that we need to make improvements. These folks got together after the workday and spent hours and volunteered their own time, their expertise, their thoughts, their feelings and emotions. And it was very moving many times being in the room. A lot goes on behind the scenes of what you hear in these reports, but we're very proud to have our final report for the year.
Well, thank you.
Jen Kless.
All right. Hello, everyone. Standing with me, I have Karen Fox. She's the librarian at the Olean Middle School. She's been a member of our committee. And then I'd like those who are members of our committee stand up so we can acknowledge you today. We had over 19 members on this committee. They were from all levels of the school district. We had support staff, we had teachers, we had administrators, we had family and community members as part of this group. We met over the course of 8 times over the course of 10 months. And the main part of our work was using the culturally responsive sustaining education framework, which was published by State Ed. We used that framework to culminate all the work that we wanted to capture that the district needed to start in making our schools better for all students. If you look in the folder, the manila folder I have in front of you, the first document is going to share with you the names of the committee members that met over the course of this school year. The committee started small and we added to it to make sure it was diverse. It represented all levels of our school community and it represented many viewpoints of families and students. The second document that you're going to look at after the list of attendees is the charge that the committee came up with in regards to what we want the official district DEI committee to do starting next school year. But before I get to that, I'd like you to pull out the big thick document that's on 11 by 17 paper, because this is truly the effort of the 19 members of this committee. And what we would like to point out to you as our starting point for doing this work starting this summer. So What we did was we had all the members of our DEI work group go into the framework, and under the principle, the first principle of creating a welcoming and affirming environment, we had everybody make 1 to 2 recommendations of what we wanted the district to focus on and implement for next school year. And when you turn, the first page is going to share what the 4 principles are of the culturally responsive sustaining education framework. The next pages are going to share with you what the recommendations were under the welcoming and affirming environment. And you're also going to see on your pages that it says in red draft 2. And I want to point that out to you because this is still a working document. It is not finished, to say the least. Our draft 1 was just getting the recommendations organized in a fashion that we could all understand them, we could present them to all of you and the public, so there was an understanding there. And then the second draft was the first time our committee was able to sit down and look at them and start thinking about those actionable steps we need to take in order to bring these to fruition. We still need to sit down with the admin team, which we're going to do this summer after we train the admin team in the culturally responsive sustaining education framework. And then over the course of the next school year, at our 3 staff days in October, January, and March, we'll be training our teachers and our support staff and all of that as well. And so please look at this as a living document. We're shooting for the stars in this aspect here, but there is a firm belief in our committee, and I would dare say a firm belief in everyone sitting in this room, that the best thing we can do is to make sure our school buildings are welcoming and affirming for not only all students, but all families that are part of our school community. And that would be the goal of this first step of this committee. I'm going to now hand the mic over to Karen Fox, because the second part of the second culminating activity that our group did was create the charge or the direction we feel the district committee should take next school year. And I'm going to let Karen talk about that.
The OCSD Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, or DEI Committee will use high-quality professional learning and data from multiple stakeholders to make recommendations in support of the advancement of culturally responsive, sustaining education for improvement in diversity awareness and cultural proficiency. To advance equity and inclusion across all areas of the school organization for all members of the school community, recommendations will be made under the following 4 principles: welcoming and affirming environment, high expectations and rigorous instruction, inclusive curriculum and assessment, and ongoing professional learning. The OCSD DEI Committee will be representative of all stakeholders, including students. The OCSD DEI Committee will meet in accordance with the schedule of district level committees. One thing that we really want to make clear is including student voice in the DEI committee. That's an important priority that came up over and over throughout our process this year. We talked about the idea of having a student ambassador or ambassadors join certain or all DEI committee meetings. We also talked about touching base with key student groups like the Student Council at OHS, the Student Activities Committee in OIMS. In the high school, we also have a Gay Straight Alliance. And going forward in the fall, we're looking forward to starting the OIMS Allies Extracurricular Club so that we can kind of gauge how we can listen to the students and factor their voices into all of our work here.
One final piece, I would just like to inform the Board of Education that starting this summer, there'll be opportunities for professional development for teachers and administrators. The one piece with the training on the framework that will be part of all PD. There is also a book study on bringing the belonging to helping to create a belonging environment into our buildings. And so as those professional development opportunities come about through CA BOCES and other areas, we will be giving those opportunities to our teaching staff and our support staff, as well as our administrators. Please reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you, Jen. And Karen, thank you too.
say how much work this represents?
Yeah, it looks like the plan for going forward has begun. There's definitely some action points on there.
Yeah.
So that's promising,
When we have as many people involved as we do.
for sure.
I say thank you. Wow, and it's about time.
My
we
pleasure.
Institutionalize some good stuff.
All right. We're gonna go ahead and move on to the presentation from the Futures Education Group. Our education assessment.
Good evening, thank you. If we could please have screen share capability.
Do you want to go ahead and share the PowerPoint then, Mr. Martell?
Okay. All right. So good evening. On behalf of the team, we thank the Board of Education to allow us to provide a summary of the educational services analysis. We were in the district across several months this year, looking at both programmatic and financial components. All told, when the reports will be generated, we're looking well over 92 pages of data that's very, very quantitative and very, very numerically rich, I'll say. So we're going to provide an overview of the primary findings. And again, we want to be respectful of the time tonight. We know that's a packed agenda. So again, we're going to provide an overview of the findings and also provide an opportunity for discussion throughout with the board chair's permission. We would welcome questions from the board throughout the presentation. And at the very end, we're going to have time for any reflection in terms of questions or thoughts from the board. So we want this to be interactive. If we go to the next slide, please.
Mike, is there any way we can split the screen so we can see their face?
Or minimize the slide.
No?
Okay, thank you. So we're ready for the next slide, if that's okay. Who's ever controlling could advance, that'd be great. I'm sorry, we're not seeing it on our screen if the slide's been advanced to the second slide.
Okay, so we're currently on the slide, specific areas of the review.
Okay, yes, I'm sorry, we're not seeing that up on our screen.
Ira, you're online. Can you see the screen?
Ira, do you see the PowerPoint screen?
Okay, this is working out good.
Yes, I see the PowerPoint screen.
We're still on the first slide as far as we can see. We don't see that it's been
Correct.
advanced.
Summary of
Yeah.
educational services. Cover page.
Mhm.
Right.
She's been in red and gold, but that's another conversation. Thank you.
it would make a difference to the one that's in Teams that you can't get to for some reason. They forwarded by email to you right now, so if you can get into your email, you'd be able to see it.
If there's an option, if you could make me, give me the ability to screen share, I think I could advance it so everyone can see it both there in the auditorium and remotely. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm still not able to advance, to project it.
So Mr. Martell, would that make a difference if he was sharing his screen, or maybe he doesn't have the ability? Okay. We're working on the technology.
Yes. Now we can see the specific areas under review on our end. So these were the 6 areas that we agreed to in the partnership when we, worked in conjunction with district leadership to look at specific areas. They were related services, speech and language, OT, PT, those services that are prescribed in the IEP to help the students access and benefit from their IEP, utilization of paraprofessional supports, out-of-district placements, continuum of services or supports, which we'll get into, the organizational structure and district coordination of programs and services, basically that balance between central office and school-based capacity to support students with learning needs. So if we think about those first 5 as programmatic, and then the 6th piece is finances pertaining to Medicaid and transportation, which Mr. LaBrie will be talking about after Mr. McGuire and I discuss the overview of the findings for the programmatic piece, in other words, sections 1 through 5. If we can move to the next slide, please. So the organization of the presentation, it really kind of parallels that of the forthcoming program report, which is the organizational considerations. In other words, what's happening in terms of professional learning, how are people feeling about support, the CSE process, the continuum of supports in terms of program descriptions, the personnel within special education, and overall finances. Those kind of round out the organizational considerations. The continuum of supports, as Mr. McGuire will talk about, we are kind of looking at ways to support all learners, not just special ed. This includes response to intervention, AIS 504, and again, special ed. We see those as sort of all ways to support struggling learners, not just special education. And when we talk about the findings tonight, we're going to talk about them in terms of findings and areas of opportunity or recommendations. And again, this last part, as we mentioned, Mr. LaBrie will be talking about the financial parameters, which will include primarily transportation with an update on Medicaid. Next slide, please. So in terms of methodology, how did we arrive at these findings? We conducted 47 confidential interviews with central office leadership, school-based administration, certified teachers, paraprofessionals, and related service providers. The interviews, again, as it makes reference, were totally confidential. And again, when you see the reports, you'll see that there's no attribution in terms of where people are located or their discipline. There's no way to know who said what, which is an extremely important part of our role to ensure confidentiality. The questions were catered to the interviewee's particular area of expertise and relevance, even though there were some overlapping questions for everybody. The questions we asked principals were different than the ones we asked paraprofessionals, just by virtue of the different roles and responsibilities. Comparative analyses to other public schools in the state and the county regarding student outcome and financial data. Again, you'll see in the reports, it's very data rich in terms of those comparative data points. And then document reviews, IEP reviews, current structure, policies and procedures, and different areas that kind of look at the the structure of special education. So I'm going to hand it over to Mr. McGuire, who's going to, again, provide an overview of these different areas.
Thank you, Michael. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. In addition to the quantitative data analysis that we do as a part of our methodology, we believe it's important to try to understand the climate and culture of the district and its component schools. So I'm going to share with you some of the findings and areas of opportunity that we drew from the data gathering in the district. In terms of climate and culture, one of the most foundational pieces we look at is what we call the culture of ownership. And what we mean by that is, to what extent do all of the adults in the schools see students with disabilities as their students? There was a perception among those interviewed that the culture of ownership in the district requires some attention, that historically this has been a significant issue in the district, as it has been in the profession at large, and that there had been some progress made, yet there remained significant areas for improvement around ownership for all students on the part of all adults. Related to that, there was a perception that there is a separation or compartmentalization between the general education component of the district and the special education. Despite the culture of ownership challenges in the district, we did find that your continuum of services does allow for significant inclusion in a least restrictive environment, in other words, with non-disabled peers, on the part of students with disabilities. So some areas of opportunity in this arena, we'd urge the district to consider developing professional learning communities that involve the integration of both special educators and general educators, the creation of a mission statement that explicitly contains elements of both general and special education, and if contractual parameters allow, expanding both the teacher evaluation process and position descriptions to specifically address the issue of ownership for all students. Next slide, please. In terms of staff support, those interviewed acknowledged the provision of professional development by the district on a variety of areas, including, for example, co-teaching. Further, they expressed a desire for more training on current and emerging topics of relevance, such as instructional strategies and intervention strategies for classroom teachers, dealing with students with social, emotional, and behavioral needs, and so forth. The configuration of central office support for administration of special ed, in our experience, is rational and appropriate to the size of the district. An area of opportunity under the area of staff support would be to maximize district professional development resources, creating a unified professional development curriculum, array of offerings, if you will, that includes both general and special educators. Next slide, please. The process of the Committee on Special Education. In terms of processes and procedures of the CSE, those were perceived by respondents as generally uniform and consistent, which is a good thing, and they seem to be understood by those who participate as stakeholders in that process. Some areas of opportunity, as part of the addressing of CSE processes and procedures, we believe it would be beneficial to revisit and establish more detailed descriptions that define the district's in-house continuum of special education programs. And once that's accomplished, to roll that information out in user-friendly ways through such things as trifolds and using the district website. Next slide. Michael?
So, and we had mentioned at the beginning, in terms of what constitutes organizational considerations, a big piece is how does the personnel look within the special ed department, and we benchmarked the different personnel across disciplines to expectations, and we have different sources. You can see on the far right, sometimes our sources are the state, and sometimes they're regulatory agencies like NASP, the National Association of School Psychologists. So when we look at the number of certified teachers, the ARI stands for Availability Ratio Index. It just basically means the amount of people within a discipline that are available to support students with disabilities as a ratio. It doesn't necessarily mean their caseload, but in effect, it's the average caseload for certified teachers. So 12.3 to 1 is leanly staffed. In New York, it averages about 10-1. So there are fewer special ed teachers to in-district students with disabilities than expectations based on our database. Paraprofessionals of 7.5-1. That means for every 7.5 students with disabilities within the district, there's one certified paraprofessional working under the direction of a special ed teacher. It's generously staffed, typically, again, ranges between 9 and 10. SLP, 43-1, it's very generously staffed. In psychology, 911-1. The reason why that's so high is the National School Association for School Psychologists recommends benchmarking, not just for students with disabilities, but for all students with general ed, in gen ed and special ed, because the school psychology workload, many times they're addressing the needs of students in both special ed and gen ed. You can see we've got some notes at the bottom. You'll see in the report, we get into a lot of qualitative commentary about some of these data points, like psychology. Psychology is part of a behavioral service provider department. And if we think of it broadly as school psychology, social work, school adjustment counselors, there's many people to meet the needs of students with social and emotional and behavioral needs, some mandated, some not. And when we looked at that as a whole, the number of behavioral health providers was not significantly different from expectations. It was just a little more leanly staffed than the mean. So we just want to qualify that. OT and PT, OT and PT, they're contracted right now through Olean General Hospital. We have quite a bit of commentary in the report about that because we need to think of it differently because they're not internal staff, the way they're contracted, the way they're providing services in terms of individual versus group therapy. But suffice to say, OT and PT are generously staffed. We convert those hourly, the hourly contract to an FTE for both OT and PT. Would be considered a generously staffed model. Again, if these were internal staff. So some of our areas of opportunity, including enacting exit and entry guidelines for related service providers and paraeducation supports, just to make sure that there's systemization and uniformity across CSE processes, and revisit the OT and PT contract with OGH. We feel that warrants some further reflection given some of the efficiencies and the overall cost of that contract. Next slide, please. Again, special education expenditures. You can see in this bar graph, Olean is on the far left in the blue bar. You can see it's been traditionally lower in terms of cost per special education student in relation to similar district groups, the state and the county. So spending for special ed has been low. Next slide, please. And I'll let Mr. McGuire pick it up from here.
Thanks, Michael. We're going to talk briefly about response to intervention. And I just want to be clear that while we were brought in to look at the special education program, response to intervention, as we know, is a general education initiative. We look at it intensely because response to intervention, for better or for worse, has significant implications for your special education program. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Among our findings, RTI exists at various levels depending on the grade and subject area within the district, and particularly stronger at the elementary level. We got some interesting feedback on RTI across the buildings, that there are a lot of good people out there doing good work to provide support interventions for your students. They tend to be doing it, however, in isolation, as islands unto themselves, so to speak. The best example from your district was within one building, there were staff who were unaware of the existence of RTI interventions at the same time that there were colleagues within the same building providing those interventions. Interviewees felt that response to intervention was not universally owned by general educators as a general education initiative, and that some viewed it as simply another set of hoops to jump through to get students to special education and the Committee on Special Education. Even at your elementary schools where RTI was the most fully implemented, the schools were functioning independent of one another. So that's an awareness that I think is important. From a quantitative perspective, the data suggests that overall the district would benefit from improvement of its RTI program, pulling it together, if you will. And what we mean by from a quantitative perspective, perhaps the best example is in districts where RTI is fully functional and working well, special ed numbers don't tend to spike. Referrals to the CSE don't tend to be on an upward trajectory. Over the most recent 3 years, we found that your numbers of referrals to the CSE were on an upward trajectory and approaching 20% of your students with IEPs, 1 in 5, which is a high number. Areas of opportunity, we would urge the district to begin to roll up student achievement data across all schools and grade levels by content area and make that data an ongoing, regular topic of conversation among all professional practitioners, administrators, and faculty alike. And to use that data to monitor student progress in a way that no student can fall through the cracks or fall into a pattern of failure. Once fully implemented, your RTI can serve not only as an upfront preventative set of interventions for students, but it can serve as a safety net of supports for students who are being declassified coming off of IEPs in special education. You've had some very limited experience with that, but once fully operational, it could serve as a universal safety net for students as they re-enter the general ed program full-time. Next slide, please. Your in-district continuum of services is inclusive of a broad array of instructional models, but they do vary depending on which schools students attend. And an issue with that would also be vertical articulation as students move upward through the grade levels and through the schools. Is there a consistent and equitable availability of that array of services? Student outcomes in academic achievement and graduation are considered to be priority areas. Almost without exception, those interviewed felt that the student learning and achievement on the part of students with disabilities was not where it needs to be. So some areas of opportunity. Bolster integrated co-teaching with instructional and administrative enhancements. Integrated co-teaching is a powerful model if done well, that benefits not only the students with disabilities included in those classes, but also students in the general ed program. Focus on processes and opportunities to bolster student graduation, including such alternative pathways as enhancing the array of career tech ed opportunities. Enhance school-based leadership with respect to special education through professional learning communities, focusing on those issues. Remember, you have special ed administration, but you also have building administrators who are critical role in the schools functioning for students with disabilities. And most general education administrators do not have a substantial background in special ed. So that we see as a real opportunity. Next slide, please. Out of district placements, you have at the time of our visit, about 17% of your students with disabilities who are placed in special ed programs outside the district. While that is within expectations for a district of your size and wealth, the constellation of students who are placed in out of district programs does suggest that there exists an opportunity for a concerted initiative to bring back and keep in more students than you currently serve within the district. So some areas of opportunity: continue to focus on the critical issues of requisite personnel, program, and physical plant capacities that will serve more students within the district, and consider appointing a point person, if you will, with a behavioral background to case manage the students who are placed out of district. And we suggest that behavioral background because so often it is behaviors that precipitate placements outside of the district. Next page, please. So in summary, very briefly, we would see as opportunities the development of a comprehensive plan to develop a pervasive culture of ownership for students with disabilities, develop clearly articulated written eligibility and exit guidelines and program descriptions for not only your special ed instructional programs, but the related services, paraprofessional supports, and testing accommodations and modifications. Review and enhance your professional development offerings, perhaps using a professional practices council model, which we can provide you with information about. Increase leadership capacity in special ed, enhancing visibility, communication, and oversight of programs. Enhance the RTI implementation with revision of the district RTI plan and implement consistent program processes and interventions. Review and enhance the district-wide continuum of services, addressing that vertical articulation that I mentioned, and include greater clarity in user-friendly communications about those programs. And finally, implement a comprehensive student achievement data gathering initiative so that analysis, utilization, and monitoring of student achievement is first and foremost district-wide for all students. And now I'll turn to my colleague, Mr. Labrie.
Good evening. I had the opportunity to review your transportation program. As you know, you currently contract with Portville for most of your regular transportation buses. You also contract with Hinsdale. They provide one route for you. The district owns and operates 4 vans. However, because of ongoing driver shortages, the district contracts with a private vendor for some of that additional transportation, such as homeless, foster children, and some of your out-of-district special ed transportation. We looked at your transportation expenditures, and one of the benchmarks we look at is the ratio of your school transportation expenditure to the district budget. We looked at this over the last 5 years and found that the ratio was about 2.65%, which is relatively low. For districts of comparable size and demographics, a ratio of 5% or less is considered to be cost effective by both industry standards and the state Department of Education. Therefore, we can say unequivocally that the district transportation operation, while a little convoluted, is considered to be relatively cost effective compared to other school districts of your size and your demographics. One of the things that we found that we have a commendation in the report for is the capital reserve fund that you have for the replacement of your transportation vehicles. The current fleet average is about 2.5 years old, with almost all of them still under warranty, and a little over 1.25 years for the vans, with half of them under warranty. Typically, we would like to see in a well thought out capital reserve plan is 50% of your vehicles under warranty at almost all times. Operating a relatively new fleet of buses certainly minimizes maintenance and repair costs, as well as makes the vehicles less downtime due to accidents and maintenance issues. So that was a very good finding on our part. Next slide, please. In order to retain and recruit quality drivers, the district, including Portville, may wish to increase its driver wage rates in order to provide drivers with a more living wage. Today, there are fewer and fewer retired people looking to drive buses. There are more people who are looking to make a living out of driving buses, therefore looking for what we call a living wage. You may wish to consider being more creative with regard to your driver eligibility for health insurance and other employee benefits in order to try to recruit and retain drivers. To alleviate the challenge with respect to competitive pay, you have an opportunity because the district could utilize some of its state and federal stimulus funds for the first year for wage and benefit increases. Given that you receive 90% state aid, the long-term cost impact would be minimal of doing that. And the other is by using state and federal stimulus funds, it has virtually no impact on the tax base. The alternative to raising wages and benefits would be to increase the number of guaranteed hours per day. Both result in increased compensation for drivers and monitors, which is the bottom line of what we're recommending. When we looked at efficiencies, we found, and there is a commendation in the report, which addresses the fact that the transportation supervisor recognizes that many, if not most, of your high school students don't ride the bus on a daily basis. And consequently, they overschedule your transportation routes to the tune of about 118% in the morning, 115% in the afternoon, which means that when you look at your actual number of riders, you're at 80% in the morning and 78% in the afternoon, both of which are relatively high ratios with regard to efficiency. And so therefore, we can be unequivocal and say that not only is the operation cost effective, but it's also highly efficient. Any appreciable increase in routing beyond what you're currently doing would require, in our estimation, a change in school bell schedules, which would allow additional time for transportation, which would result in longer routes, fewer bus stops, longer walking distances to those bus stops, and certainly not something we recommend at this point. As you know, transportation is a support service to the educational process. School times, bell schedules, school year, configuration of your school schedules, those decisions should be made by the board for educational purposes, not for the benefit of transportation. Next slide. As of this writing, we're not prepared to discuss the Medicaid report. We've had the questions came up last Friday with regard to some of the reports that we were provided. I'm sorry?
Can we just ask you a question about the transportation for a second?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay, for the transportation, I was under the impression that 8th grade through 12th grade was not allowed to ride the bus. So I'm confused as to why we're.
8th grade through 12th grade can ride the bus if they live outside the city limits, or if there is something on their IEP providing transportation service.
So wouldn't
8th
that
through
be?
12th, they live outside the city limits.
So what exactly is that? I mean, what?
Like you mean,
Yeah, I mean, when he's saying that a huge percentage of our students in high school are not riding the bus, I mean, you're basically telling me then that that's because they're not allowed to.
because a huge majority of our students live within the city limits.
Right, so it really didn't, I mean, we don't have a lot of people riding the bus because they're not supposed to.
It's a high school bus.
Right, and he's saying that we could have more students riding the bus, it sounds like, because we're not utilizing the buses.
So they look at the number who are eligible versus the ridership, so the number that actually ride. So I think one of the percentages he said was 115% for the afternoon. So we essentially have 115% of a bus that could be filled. So it's over capacity essentially. If everybody that was eligible got on that bus, we would be at 115% capacity. Only 78% of those students actually ride in the afternoon. So my kids may be eligible, but they don't choose to ride. So they're looking at who's eligible versus who actually rides. And they're saying it's very efficient because 78% of those kids will actually ride.
If I could add, you're actually about as efficient as you're going to get with the operation that you currently have. And let me give you the exact numbers. You have 606 school bus seats in the morning, and you have an actual number of students, 487, filling those seats. Could you fill more seats? Yes, you could, but it would require a change of bell schedule. What that means is that if you had more time, you could transport more kids. but you're already about as efficient as you're going to get from a practical standpoint.
for multiple routes. Yeah. So with the older students though, I guess, I mean, do we have room to put some of the are we comparable to other districts? I mean, do other districts
Well,
also not allow
That's a
their
real good
students to-
question. I think what we're hearing is that we have a really good handle compared to some other districts on who's riding and who's not. So some of those reasons might be because some of our students drive to school, for example, and we know who, so they, I guess it's the predictability is very high in the Olean City School District of knowing who's riding the bus. We're not expecting kids to ride, providing a bus for kids to ride who are eligible to ride, and then they don't show up, which is more inefficient. What we have is a more efficient, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, that we're more efficient and much more able to determine who's going to be riding and are providing that ride to those who are eligible and actually riding. So it's the actual ridership compared to who's eligible.
But as far as the eligibility compared to other school districts, do other school districts allow their whole district to ride their buses?
Let me answer the question if I could. We've done probably, I'm going to guess, 10 or 12 school districts in New York in this past year. And your efficiency ratio is one of the highest that we found. You know, typically the benchmark for considered to be highly efficient is 74% actual ridership. And you're well above that in both morning and afternoon. So if it gives you kind of a basis for comparing yourself to other districts, you know.
Well, I'll point out that since we are a small city school district and our diameter of the city is like 3 miles by 1.5 or by 1 mile, everything's more contained. So we don't have the transportation miles per se as a centralized school district, which has to go considerably out of the area. And that's pretty much it as far as how that, one of the considerations as far as transportation.
Yes, and there are state regulations on the transportation areas, and then the school board determines what that distance is that a family or student needs to, how far away they have to be before they can ride on the transportation as opposed to walking to school. And if your question is, are there school districts where everybody walks? Is that what you were asking? Everybody rides, right? So did you have any information, gentlemen, on that?
Are there other similar school districts?
Similar school
where
districts.
everybody gets to ride? I mean,
Not
I
in
realize
a
central
city
school
school
district would
district.
allow that.
In some of the more rural areas, you have a higher percentage of students who may be riding as opposed to being scheduled. The limitation for large rural school districts is a student's time on bus. We've worked with school districts that are over 100 square miles of service area, and consequently routes are generally in the 60-minute area of time for students on buses. And there you may not have the ridership efficiency based on the number of riders, but in order to increase the number of riders, you would have to increase the length of the route. And then your routes would be well in excess of 60 minutes. So there are trade-offs, and that's why we look at the demographics of the district to make our best judgment as to what constitutes, given your size and your demographics, efficiency. And as I said, based on what I've seen, you're probably one of the more efficient districts that we've had the opportunity to work with.
So, yeah, so Kelly, each district is different, but the state regulations actually, I believe for students in grades K through 7, maybe K through 6, don't quote me on it, but it's very similar. They actually can walk up to 2 miles. Students at the high school level can actually walk up to 3 miles. Those are the state regulations. That's a very long distance for a lot of our children. However, there are also other criteria that figure into that. Are there safety zones such as no sidewalks? Are there railroad tracks? Are there things of that nature? So there's a lot of other things that factor into that. Because we're a small city school, we are a little different. The board here, I believe it was in 2012, adopted a transportation policy identifying the parameters for what makes our kids eligible and not eligible for transportation. So I believe it was 2012 that the board accepted or that a resolution on that.
And that has to be done in voter referendum.
Yes, yes. So we can't just switch guidelines, and we get calls very regularly from families about transportation. You know, and we can't just change it, you know, as families move either. So if obviously we were to change any of those guidelines, as you could see, it would have a big impact on these numbers. While we're very efficient, that's fantastic. It doesn't leave a lot of empty seats on our buses for new students who become eligible for transportation. We also, part of our policy indicates that if a rider has not ridden the bus consecutively for 5 days, they're dropped from that list and they have to contact the district office to be added back to that. Because if we didn't have tight regulations, because we're so efficient, we wouldn't have a good handle on what those numbers truly were.
So if a kid is sick for an entire week, he would have to reapply.
No, days of attendance. So you're attending, but not riding the bus.
Okay.
If I could add one more thing, one of the reasons that you need some excess capacity on your buses has shown over the last year and a half in particular, when you have responses to COVID, that you have to have a certain amount of spacing for students that are not within the same family on a bus. And in order to be able to do that without adding buses, you have to, or staggering your transportation system, you have to have some of that excess capacity. The other is that oftentimes the students who are riding in the spring are not necessarily the students who are riding in the fall, depending on sports schedules, athletic events, and things of that nature. So you have to have the capacity to be able to absorb changes throughout the school year. And again, you have 606 seats, but that's 3 students to a seat. And when you're talking middle school students and higher, it's difficult to get 3 to a seat. Even 2 to a seat is sometimes not practical and ends up in behavioral issues and disruption on a school bus. So as I said, the benchmark is about 74% of actual capacity as being efficient, and you certainly exceed that. Are there any other, by the way, when you see the report, you'll see all of the metrics with regard to your routes, with regard to the actual times for each route, the average route times, your average mileage per route and per bus. It's pretty data rich in terms of looking at the metrics as we did to analyze your both efficiency as well as your cost effectiveness.
So what I'm hearing is that we're really efficient and we've got a great handle on the cost effectiveness.
Correct.
So we have an opportunity, say, to increase our rider eligibility because we're so well managed.
So a bigger question is, what do we?
I actually, let me go on from that a little bit. While we're very efficient, if you look at the first numbers he presented versus the second numbers, in the morning, we're very efficient, but it doesn't allow for a lot of empty seats. So it doesn't allow for a lot of additional kids to be added without requiring either A, more buses, or B, multiple routes. And that's where he went back to bell schedules.
Right.
Correct.
So yeah, I'm not thinking tomorrow. I'm thinking next year, maybe the year after that. Increase, add a bus, add a route, something, maybe, something to consider.
Recruit drivers.
Right.
Yeah, that goes back to the staffing issues and concerns. We're keeping our eyes on that market, and as that would increase, which we hope in the next few years, that we will see more drivers available. Right now, we're short just about every day. Sometimes we're short in the bus garage by 5 or 6 drivers. So what that means is the folks who usually answer the phones, work on the buses, and manage the place are driving. So if we were to tell them that today, I think they might have a coronary.
Well, yeah, I don't want to put it on tomorrow's
Right,
schedule,
right.
but,
Yeah.
Well, you know that there is a national shortage of drivers. And what you may not know, but it is certainly in the report, is that the private companies have been recruiting school bus drivers very heavily around the holidays, offering both higher wages, full-time employment, and guaranteed overtime, as well as some benefits. And so they target school bus drivers because they know that they're reliable. They know that they're drug and alcohol free for the most part. And they can manage following a schedule.
For the most part, our policy is 10 years old, and we probably should have renew it every 5 years per se to contend with updated situations. And obviously, this is one of them. And do we have any built-in contingencies where the district can make emergency situations and emergency decisions if we have to change said policy out of necessity?
You need voter approval.
That's what I mean. I mean, can we build that in maybe next year? Oh, okay.
But as driver training schools get back to work, because really that's been a huge issue. Is they can't train because the instructors are off with COVID, so they're canceling classes all the time. And as we get more drivers certified back to a more normal world, there'll be more eligible drivers. Skills of our management team. Just say it, it's a possibility.
You're doing a great job, Jenny.
This policy, it looks like only K through 7 is allowed to ride. It doesn't say anything about 8th grade through 12th.
It doesn't.
I mean, the policy doesn't address them at all.
Is that state law though?
I can send you after the meeting, the board resolution that was adopted. Yeah.
Okay, so we move on to the next portion. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we're not able to discuss the Medicaid report at this point. Last Friday, we had some questions with regard to some of the reliability of the data that we received this fall when we did our site visit. And we'll be reviewing both the revenue side and the expenditure side with your administrative team on the 28th of this month. I'll be back in your district. At that point, when we clarify and answer the questions that have come up, we'll provide a separate Medicaid report to administration and to the board.
Can you tell us why it took from October until June 1st to figure out there was problems with your data?
All I can say is we had a meeting on Friday, and that's when some of the questions arose concerning some of the data. And we went back and looked at some of the reports that we were provided. And administration thought best to update the data and have us use more current data than what we did in the fall.
I mean, we've been waiting for 6 months. We've missed a budget season, and it's really, really frustrating to pay for consultants and then have you decide, well after we expected the report to be finalized, that you didn't have reliable data and that you're only finding it out 8 months after you actually gathered the data. That's pretty frustrating.
I agree, it is. But on the other hand, I would be remiss if I gave you a report with data that, one, we're not comfortable with, and secondly, your administration may not be comfortable with. And I would rather delay giving you the report and ensure its accuracy.
Do you want to?
So are you saying that the preliminary data that we saw in the draft report is not reliable at all, or this just needs to be fine-tuned, or what?
I'm not prepared to answer that tonight until I go back to the district in 2 weeks and sit with them to have them rerun reports and rebuild my templates to see what the analysis looks like with the current data. Yes, sir.
Janine, I find this very frustrating.
Ira's got a question.
Thank you. When this is finalized, and I share the frustration, would you anticipate it being done by next month's board meeting and doing a presentation on that particular piece as well?
It'll take me about 3 or 4 days to finalize the report once I'm there. So I would expect to have the report done probably by the end of this month.
Okay.
That next meeting is on June 28th, so that's where that question is coming from. It would be optimal if we had that on June 28th.
I am there on the 28th gathering the data. There's no way I can turn that around in a day.
Can you hear me? I don't know.
I can.
Okay, so, I'm listening to your presentation. Please don't take this the wrong way. You really didn't tell us a whole lot more than what we probably already had an idea of. And I say that I don't believe that we are unique in our district in that culture and climate, that ownership of all students. I feel that's rather pervasive through many districts. It's hard. I'm a special education teacher by trade, and it's a challenge. So while I appreciate you giving us that information, I don't feel we're alone in our district in that area. You mentioned something about on slide 10 that we're leanly staffed in our special education teachers. Are you saying that you believe we should be hiring more special education teachers? What did you mean by that?
Actually, it was the opposite. We didn't say you were leanly staffed in special ed. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we did say that 12.1. I misunderstood. I thought you were asking about para educators. Yes, you're right. The 12.1 ratio, it does reflect a leanly staffed model. Go ahead, John.
I would just like to lean into that question a little bit. We offer this data for comparative purposes, and it's important that we clarify for you as our receiving audience, so to speak, that the data is non-judgmental. It doesn't celebrate where you are, and it doesn't criticize where you are. It's just comparative data based on our database and working with over 300 districts across the country. So when you look at that data, the important question is to say, so how are our students doing? If you are leanly staffed and your students are soaring academically, good for you. If you are generously staffed, but your students aren't doing well, that raises another scenario. So it really comes down to giving you some comparative information so that you can make an informed determination. If you're satisfied with where your students are performing, then maybe you want to leave it alone. If you're not, maybe one of the issues you'd want to consider is enhancing your staffing. That's one among a variety of things that you might do to improve student achievement. So as you look at the data, remember, it's not making those kinds of decisions for you. That decision-making remains with you.
Is there comparative data on student achievement? Did I miss that?
Yes.
We were 0%. Yeah. Is that correct? That we had a 0% success rate. That is, if you were referred to special ed as a first or second grader, you have a 0% chance of reading or doing math at grade level by 8th grade.
Yes.
And a 50% chance of not completing high school at all, roughly speaking.
So that's why I was asking
Yeah.
that. It seems to me that might be an area.
So I would say we're not satisfied with our students.
We are not. I don't believe we
But
are.
I'm wondering why we're referring so many kids to special ed then. I mean, if our staff is lean, one way to handle that is not to put so many kids in special ed.
Sure.
Then the leans, the ratios get better. And if special ed is not rehabilitating anyone, what are we doing?
So you also mentioned in your report of our continuum of services. And while I might agree that our continuum of services is appropriate, perhaps at the elementary school level, maybe, sounds like they're doing a pretty good job over at the middle school, but at the high school, I don't really even see a continuum of services that I would say, and I know you're going to say you're integrated co-teaching. I know you're going to say that, but there are other models that have proven successful. Integrated co-teaching is challenging. It's very challenging at the high school level, where I feel that's an area of weakness for us, I believe, is our continuum of services at the high school level. If kids are getting special education services through their elementary school years, they roll into their middle school years and they have had a specific type of service, and then they get to the high school and we've got nothing, then no wonder we're not seeing the level of success. So you say, wow, yeah, great, continuum of services. I'm not seeing that, and I would have expected your report to have been a little bit more clearer on that and maybe showed us that. Often on your slides, you say you could benefit from this, might be better to do that. I was really looking for some definitive answers as to what was expected and what we could maybe look from your firm. And I don't know. I mean, I suppose we could benefit from a lot of things, but I was really looking for a lot more clearer guidance as to where we could be doing a much better job in the special education department. And I didn't see that.
Our approach to the work, and I take your comments to heart, is one of working as a partner with the district. We're not in the mode of telling you what you should do in a direct way, but to say to you, here are some ways that you might build on the foundation that you've established. And you've heard in the reporting even tonight, the use of the term vertical articulation. And you just described vertical articulation, or the lack thereof, when you talked about the transition from elementary to middle to high school. You do want to be sure that there's a rationality. You don't have gaps in your array of services. And with respect to integrated co-teaching, we have found integrated co-teaching to be a very powerful and effective model if it's done well. We also know that even integrated co-teaching, which is a best practice in the profession, is not a one-size-fits-all, that it will not meet the needs of every student who's identified. The other observation about if our special ed program isn't working effectively to our satisfaction, we could put fewer students in it if it's not going to help them. Well, the criteria for eligibility for special ed is very, very well defined in law and regulation in the state of New York. So it isn't a matter of just deciding we won't identify more children. You have to do that on an individual basis through your committee on special education. But your question, nevertheless, is important. If we are not seeing the performance of students in our special ed program, we have a lot to work on, whether it's quantitative or qualitative or a combination of both. Are our students well placed? Are they receiving the services that best address their identified needs and present levels of performance? The other piece of it, which I alluded to in part of our program report tonight, is your general ed response to intervention program. We have said in relatively diplomatic terms that really needs to be pulled together. You've got good people out there working in isolation, trying to do good things for children. They don't have a common referent. Many of them are not even aware of response to intervention or of a response to intervention plan in the district. While we're aware that there is a response to intervention plan in the district, at least at the elementary level. So identifying that as a priority, that has red flags all over it from our perspective, that certainly emerges as a priority in terms of preventing unnecessary referrals to special ed, bringing those numbers down and allowing you to focus more intensive interventions for those students who truly require special education, while your general ed initiative is taking care of the needs of students who are struggling a bit, but really don't need special education.
Thank you.
And it looks like the power is in taking all of those recommendations together. So there wasn't any one area of opportunity, but when you take them together, especially keeping an eye on the RTI, that's going to make a difference on the ownership. And as we're looking at our staffing and where that staffing is, I mean, as we started to get in some of these recommendations early on in the year, we started already making changes. We didn't have that continuum of services that had been articulated. We have groups of teachers who've been working on that through staff development, and it's getting better. Now, what we're doing in our next step in the recommendation for into next year is to not just have that district-wide, but they'll be working on that at building level. So going at each level, we'll have an idea of what that continuum looks like and the nuances at each of them, making changes as we need them according to students' needs. And I think we have a greater focus now on the student outcomes because it's stark. When you look at exactly what Janine had said, it's a stark reality that it's frightening when you look at those statistics for our students as they're entering into special education. And I think it's been helpful just in hearing some of those recommendations all taken together that will give us some of the blueprint for change that we need. And that has started, but I'm just saying it's just started. It has opened our eyes to a lot of areas. The meeting that you had last Friday with our administrators on Medicaid is, it wasn't just looking at the data, it was also that understanding the data. We've increased our training. We took your recommendation where we have a person where that's their sole responsibility. However, we have additional training within that office, and we have a fully staffed office now, thank goodness too, where we have backup people who are also trained in Medicaid. So it's not an afterthought now, which, let's be honest, it was an afterthought. When you had time, you'd go back and do the Medicaid. Medicaid now is a priority because whatever those numbers are, they're not going to be where we want them to be. And we were not getting fully funded and fully reimbursed for what we needed. The data you've given us has been helpful in starting along that way. And I just want to say thank you for that meeting and getting clearer on what it looks like now and our numbers compared to what they were, to also see what kind of improvement do we have so far this year as it's been brought to our attention. And so I probably won't be here, but I'm sure everyone else is looking very forward. I wish I was, to hear a little bit more about, what kinds of strides we made this year. So thank you for that assistance with our administration and our special education department.
With this report, is there any summary of what success of implementing these would look like for our district? I mean, there's some recommendations, but I mean, what does it look like to be successful? Or are there even any similar sized school districts that are also, working on similar budgets that are doing things more successfully that we could try to model after? I mean, are there any recommendations like that look to have? Because, I mean, there's some vague recommendations, but it seems like there could be more. Do you have anything like that that we could see?
What does a successful program achieve?
I'm not sure to whom you're addressing the question.
I mean, I guess I'm wondering, like, if we were to implement, some of these recommendations, how would we know that we're seeing success? How do we see that we've, done better? What would that look like for a district like ours? And are there other school districts that are already doing things that we could try to model after? And can you provide those recommendations to us as to who to ask for further, assistance and to see what their programs look like?
We very often provide technical assistance to our partner districts as they move forward in following up on some of these opportunities. And yes, we've got a pretty substantial array of data available in our database in terms of models, depending on which particular initiative you're following up on, if it's RTI or if it's your continuum, if it's professional development around things like integrated co-teaching. Certainly there are things that we can help you with, whether it's brainstorming or actually delivering professional development and technical assistance.
Yeah. If I could add to that, John, it's a very good question about how do teams determine if interventions are successful? A lot of these really do lend themselves to sort of post hoc analyses, right? So we mentioned RTI. One of the best practices you'll see in Appendix C in the report that the roll-up of the referrals was based on that's actual data that John and I had analyzed in the Hudson Valley about 5 years ago. They looked at the data, they rolled up the data across the schools, and they reported as metadata. And you'll see if CSE, some of the RTI suggestions are successful, you'll see the referrals to the CSE will trend down, and the number of students that are identified will trend up. In other words, those are students who will be referred to CSE that truly that rise to the level of needing an IEP. Graduation rates, you'll see, I think, fairly specific recommendations about engaging students in career tech education opportunities. Over time, you'll see graduation rates rise. We know that that's been a challenge with the district, although it ticked upwards in the last NICEA data point. So that was nice to see, but we know graduation rates have a long way to go. Integrated co-teaching, if that becomes part of the continuum from K-12, especially at the upper grades, you'll see that the students in gen ed, at least 80% of the time, will increase. So we think that all of these best practices, these recommendations, are areas of opportunity, if implemented, will reveal their success in the data.
But would that success, I mean, if we started implementing it now, I mean, are we waiting 15 years to find out if we were successful or not? I mean, what is our, is it like a 3 years and you recheck? Is it, I mean, if you already have kids in 9th, 10th, 11th grade now who haven't received that all the way through, is it, we can't really see the results for another 10 years? I mean, do we have an idea of what percentages we would expect to see go up and how long that would take? I mean,
let me just give one example, because the answer to your question varies depending on what you're trying to measure. Some you can measure in a shorter time frame than others. The district Michael was alluding to that we worked with just a few years ago, when we looked at their data, we found that their special ed referrals were skyrocketing. When we looked at the students who were referred and the percentage of those students who actually qualified as students with disabilities, we found that fully 1/3 of the students referred weren't eligible for special education. They didn't need special education. We looked at their RTI program and it was virtually non-existent. It was in name only. It was very ineffective. So the district set a goal to enhance its response to intervention starting at tier 1 in the general education classrooms and up through tier 2 and tier 3. And to do just what Michael described, monitor the numbers of students referred to the CSE, and at the same time, monitor what percentage of those students who were referred actually qualified. The goal, obviously, was to see fewer students referred to the CSE, and that those students who were referred actually qualified as students with disabilities. That can be a relatively quick turnaround as soon as you feel you have your RTI functional. So within a school year, you would likely see those referrals coming down if your RTI is actually effective for students who are struggling but not truly disabled.
So yeah, just to reiterate the point, it really depends on the indicator you're looking at in terms of outcome. The RTI data, that might be the end of next school year. You will see some of that data bearing fruit. Things like student graduation with more, systematic career tech ed opportunities, that might be a 3-year plan. So it really depends on the indicator and the amount of time, but I don't think any of us are thinking 10 or 15 years, I think anywhere between 1 to 3 or perhaps 5 is realistic in many of these cases.
So I'd like to make a comment about a pattern. I don't know if it's a pattern, but it bothers me a little bit that there's RTI happening on an island. I know that we sat in this room before and gone through an RTI plan that was presented to us. But if it's not out to all the teachers, if there's not buy-in all through the teachers, or if there's not PD or professional learning going on to all the teachers about the RTI plan, then it's not happening. And we're seeing that in a couple of things here. Increased training to bolster ICT. We need professional learning communities. I have a note here, PPC model. That's something we might want to look into. You might want to share that with us. That would be great.
Did we lose the sound?
Not
I'm
sure.
not hearing anyone from the board.
Are we still connected?
RTI is all staff.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it basically says, support that RTI was received or owned by general educators.
Integrated co-teaching should be all
only as a
teachers too.
necessary pass-through to special education referral. That's all.
I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, just so you're aware, if you're asking us questions, we're not hearing you.
That's all right. We were kind of having a discussion here amongst ourselves.
Oh, okay. Are there any other questions for us?
Probably not till the next meeting.
I'm going to say no. We'll look forward to hearing the report about the Medicaid finances, and I think we're all set with you guys for tonight. Is there anything else? Anybody?
Will we have an opportunity to review that Medicaid information before the next meeting? No.
Probably not before July 5th either. That would be our next meeting after that. If I'm understanding the timeline correctly, you're going to be here on the 28th.
I am going to be in district on the 28th.
All right, then you need 3 or 4 days to compile. So our next meeting is on the 5th. So you probably won't have that over the holiday weekend either. So we're looking deeper into July before we'll anticipate seeing. I'd like to put a date on it before we leave here.
My expectation would be to get you the report over the holiday weekend.
Over the holiday weekend?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You'll be in person?
We'll work on it. All right, anything else? Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Evening.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
All right, next on the agenda, we have the code of conduct revisions. Is Mr. Andrea? Yes, okay.
Good evening. Yeah, so we went through and had a nice representation of community members and staff and students. And we came up with kind of a holistic approach to change. It's not just one grade level or what, but we saw in all three of the discipline matrices a similar problem. And what it was where we had the term PINS referral placed. There were a few things wrong with it. One was that it was very inconsistent. It was in some categories where maybe it didn't need to be, and then it was in others, or it wasn't in others where it should have been. So in 24 places, we're recommending that we would remove the term PINS referral and replace it 3 times at the end of each matrix, the K3 matrix, the 4-7 matrix, and the high school matrix, a statement that says any of the above violations can result in a referral to an outside agency, including a PINS referral, upon the recommendation of the school administrator.
Mr. Andriano, the PINS is pupil in need of supervision.
Yes, it is. Thank you. So that was really the main conversation that we had. So we looked through quite a bit, and that's all we're recommending, other than the basic date changes and things like that.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Andriano on that? I know we're doing there's a report next.
We'll have a
Public
hearing,
report?
right? The public hearing will be before the next meeting, I believe at 6 p.m. Is that correct? And that will invite the public to come and hear it. If there's any changes, we're also recommending that if you're looking at it and you would like to see any changes or you have questions about it, please call Mr. Andriano and ask him about it. He would welcome to have that before the hearing.
Do we have a list of people who are on PINS? Do we have a list of people who are on, or students who are on PINS, people in need of supervision?
Do we have a list? Well, the schools, when a student is on PINS, and PINS is historically, it's changed a little bit over the years and step in at any time, but this is something that that law enforcement, working with family courts, working with probation officers, working with school districts, can help parents when students are in need of supervision. Sometimes it's problems at school, problems at home, problems running out of either home and or school. And what we have found over the years is students in situations where we used to refer to PINS, they don't necessarily have the capacity to provide us the support that we've enjoyed in the past. So whether it's going to be a new program under a different name, or we get to a point where there are more probation officers and more assistance through PINS, then PINS might become once again a more effective program.
And the administrator would select the students, or how does that?
Oh, a parent can also put their son or daughter on PINS by calling and getting that assistance. Sometimes it would, in my experience, sometimes it's been a probation officer that would come to the house and come and check on Junior. Let's say that your child is one who is not going to school and you can't get your student to go to school at all. Then historically, there would be someone who would come to the house every morning and help you get your child out of the home and off to school. It's just one example of where PINS has been helpful in the past.
Thank you.
It's a coordination of school and community resources.
Yes.
Anything else? All right, thank you, Mr. Adriano. All right, then we've got some policies to review. First one up,
Yes.
All right, first up, we've got the audit committee policy. There was a couple of minor changes on that, housekeeping, really. Any discussion on that one?
Do we consider this committee audit and finance or simply audit? Because the language that I read said only audit.
Yeah, we have a combined finance committee and audit committee.
Right.
In the finance committee, you can also think of as being the finance subcommittee of the audit committee. But when every school district has to have an audit committee, so our policy is based on the function that has to happen, which is the audit committee itself. That's the basis behind our policy 5560.
So there is no mandate for a finance committee, only
No,
an
sir.
audit committee?
No.
Okay.
And Paul, I think that we did sort of change the charge a little bit to incorporate in our audit and finance committee some finance responsibilities, but it's not statutorily mandated to be an audit committee.
If I can just repeat two concerns. One is if I'm a member of the general public, I can attend a committee meeting. And part of this policy that says, however, if such a board member's attendance results in a meeting of a quorum of the full board, any action taken by a formal vote may constitute official board action. Well, that same admonition ought to then apply to each and every committee of the board. But I don't think there's a problem with all board members attending a committee meeting, provided that those on the committee do the talking, those not on the committee do the observing, and shut up.
So I also wanted more clarity on that as well, Ira. Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
actually think that your understanding, Ira, which is how this board has always understood committee attendance, you can attend as a member of the public, just not as a board member, another committee meeting, that as long as you don't play an active role, and certainly that there's no vote taken, then you're not acting as a board member at that meeting. I mean, I think the language in this policy and this board's kind of course of conduct are reconcilable.
Well, they are reconcilable, but they ought to apply to all.
I think it does.
I'm just wondering, it says any action taken by formal vote may constitute official board action. It's on page 2 under C. So is it saying that if there's supposed to be 9 board members, if there's 5 there and there's an action taken, it's official board vote?
I think only if the attendees who are not on the committee actually vote.
Right.
So as long as the attendees who are not on the committee don't participate and don't vote, and in fact, really don't contribute to the deliberations, then I don't think that you have a violation of this particular policy. No, it doesn't.
And it does speak to the risk, and that's always the risk. Whenever you have a quorum present anywhere, that whether it's at a committee meeting or you're just getting together, there's always that risk that you're discussing board business and it could constitute a board meeting.
Should that be if such a board member's attendance exceeds whatever 5, the board members are nothing more than non-participant observers? not participants? Because
Well,
you're
I
not a
thi-
participant.
I think what Dr. Gillen is saying is that no matter how you cut it, there's
Yeah.
always that risk. What I don't quite understand is what the open meeting status of these committee meetings is. I mean, why don't we just make them open meetings?
I don't,
They are.
what I don't
But we
understand,
don't
This one
publish
is
it. We
The audit
don't-
and finance committee, or the audit committee is a public meeting.
But we don't, we don't publish the agenda. It's, I don't know, we don't seem to make it very inviting for people to come to the committee meetings.
Well, it is a committee meeting. It's not a regular board meeting.
Well, I understand,
That's
but
the difference.
I'm gonna shut up.
to my understanding at least, I thought the only way a vote could be taken was at an official board meeting with the members of the board. So these committees can't make any votes, can they?
Recommendations.
They can make recommendations, so that shouldn't even matter if all the board members are in attendance, should it?
I mean, it hasn't been our practice that we've taken votes at any of our committee meetings. So
right.
could we just put in like another, what?
We have in the past.
In audit and finance,
I'm saying in committee.
in general committee meetings, but are we talking about all committees
I'm talking
now, or are we
about all of
talking
them.
about
In general,
just audit?
Well, to
I mean,
bring,
I don't think I've been part of any votes on any committee meetings.
any vote would be to bring something to the board.
I mean, it's usually let's recommend to send this to the next board meeting. It's not typically a vote to vote on anything where we're putting something into practice. I mean, we shouldn't be doing it because we typically don't ever have more than 3 members, maybe 4 members.
Before, I know we have. I don't know.
Well, part of our continuous improvement philosophy, so.
I mean, if we just added one in there saying, at no committee meeting will a board vote take place, I mean, what would we be voting on that we wouldn't be voting on with the whole board present?
I know I have.
There would be no vote.
That's what I'm saying. What would we be voting
Yeah,
on?
Sometimes you don't have to put something in there that's not needed.
I mean, not to put you on the spot or anything, Vicky, but you're taking the notes at all the meetings. Do you know
Well,
what we may
this
have
is
voted on
about
in
the audit
past?
committee though, so this discussion on policy 5560 is really on the audit committee itself.
Mhm.
Okay. Right, so the audit committee, there's a lot of discussions. Is there a vote per se from the audit committee?
Not in the years that I've been on that committee. We haven't had a formal vote. It's more
I mean, I was
an
on-
understanding or a consensus
Yeah, I would say.
to move
Send it.
things along to the board level.
Yeah, I was on that one for a year and I don't remember ever voting anything. I mean,
So
unless
is
you're
there
saying
any,
We vote to accept the minutes from the last meeting.
So is the terminology acceptable here, or do we want to change
Or to
it?
go into executive session.
Yeah, we've taken those.
Yeah, we,
this does allow, the audit committee allows for executive session. Right, that's in here.
It does.
It does.
Page
No, it's just
2.
we've taken votes to do that.
What basically all the changes is that there's just a couple of changes, right? What I
Correct.
see. I mean, there isn't any, I mean, it is what it is, but again, one of the things that we're trying to do is be a little bit more clear with our committees. That's why we talking about mission statements and what's the actual, what do we actually expect from these committees? I mean, in all honesty, I would like our committees to just recommend and refer things back, or if we encounter something here, we refer it back to look at a committee. I'm not a big fan of all these committees, so, I mean, we have to have this audit. Maybe that's why we're looking at the policy, but I mean, I really like the idea of, yeah, we can discuss it, we can talk about it, but let's get it back to the board. It's important that the board is aware. Now, that doesn't speak to whether anybody can attend or listen or whatever all it is, but I I do feel myself, if I'm listening I get more out of it probably than I do reading the minutes. I get more out of attending the meeting, even if I'm just listening about what's going on. I just think that paragraph is a little bit, if such board members' attendance results in a meeting of a quorum of the full board, then any action may constitute official board action. I think it's just kind of, like you said, it's just a warning, kind of, isn't it? That, just be aware of the fact that, if we're all there and we're all talking and we're, that could be looked at as a board.
I think though where this gets tricky is that if 5 people are there, correct? Then it could become a vote. And so what about the other 4 people who aren't there? So I mean, can we just put in, if you're not a member of the committee, you can't vote? You can.
You're not allowed to vote period anyway.
Actually, I think
You
that,
should not speak.
yeah, the open meetings laws it's broader than just voting. I mean, you're not supposed to meet as a board at an uncalled meeting, without proper notice, and talk about things, even if you don't actually come to a vote. So it's not only voting, it's active participation. It's acting as though you are a board member and not simply, a resident of the city of Olean who is watching. I mean, that's the difference. And I think you got to be very aware of coming in with that non-board member hat on.
We like to offer our ideas. Here's something that we really shouldn't be, we're not part of that.
So can we make something like that more clear in here? Like if it's okay to come, but you're not as a non-participant. So that it doesn't say anything in here that, you could vote. I mean, because I think that would be the thing that would get me is if I'm, not showing up to that meeting, and then I find out that 5 people did show up to the meeting and there was a vote for whatever reason on something, and I hadn't been able to go to the meeting, then I'd be pretty mad at something I voted on.
Honestly, that's the risk of ever having 5 people or more. So if you're asking for, my recommendation is when you're having your committee meetings, don't have 5 or more people. And then trust your fellow board members who are working on that, whatever topic it would be in the committee setting. Because if it's something the whole board should do, then you should bring it to the whole board to discuss and all work out. And what kinds of things are the things you can delegate to your subcommittee. But part of it is trusting that subcommittee to do the work they've been entrusted to do and that they volunteered to sit on the committee to do. It's a very slippery slope, and it's a very dangerous place when you all of a sudden have 5 together.
How about non-committee board members in attendance are not allowed to participate in any formal vote?
In the meeting.
They shouldn't be able to participate.
During the committee meetings, yeah.
Yeah.
To observe only.
Right.
Well, that's a gift.
So any board member who's not a member of the audit committee may be allowed to attend an audit committee meeting, but not participate.
As an observer. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, as it.
Well, this is like a
as an
standard
observer,
disclaimer.
May
as
not
it is right
participate
now.
in any action.
I'm just not too comfortable with the terminology here because it just gives the illusion that, well, we're not supposed to be voting anyway, and you're just supposed to be a non-participant observer.
That
It's authorized by a board resolution. You still say so-and-so can attend and make a resolution that they could come, or what's that about? Just wondering. I mean, any board member who's not a member may be allowed to attend if authorized by a board resolution. Let's do that.
Well, then I would request a board resolution, but I do not think you can take away a board member's right to be a member of the public and attend a public committee meeting. We have to be mindful of our responsibilities, and as I said earlier, maybe not talk and just listen. That may be hard for some of us to do, including myself from time to time, but that's the rules of the road as I see them.
So I think we can take that paragraph and make it more definitive to that effect, and then we'll look at it again at the next board meeting.
Well, it's misleading because it says, well, any action taken may constitute official board action. You don't take official board action at a committee meeting.
Well, here's the thing too, if somebody that's on the audit committee is absent for whatever reason, and you're still less than a quorum, now does that give your observer the authority to participate?
No, because they're not part of the committee.
Well, let's make that clear. We can clear that up. Let's- let's
That
make
has been your practice, though.
I agree. So let's.
It has.
It has.
We've allowed people that aren't part of it, because we're one down one, that they can join the.
Yes.
Well, there would be a chair decision, wouldn't it?
Well, it shouldn't be, but it has.
Well, we can make it so that it's not a chair decision.
I'm
So I
just
think we should
saying.
say that in that paragraph.
Or up the, or have a process so we can engage that.
Do you have some suggested wording you want to send?
We can ponder on it, no sense thinking about.
We have an operations committee meeting coming up.
We won't take any formal votes, but we'll look at it.
Yeah, I would say, look at that and throw the language together in operations for that paragraph. Make it short and sweet. You can't participate unless you're on the committee, but you can observe.
There
And you
should never be a
denote
vote.
that. If you are attending via Zoom, you should denote yourself as an observer as well. Change your name to
Unless you're
observer,
part of the committee.
unless you're on the committee.
And then, and if there's someone, a committee member who's not in attendance, that it's not our practice to pull another board member onto the committee. then
Yep.
I didn't really see that.
Oh, yeah, it happens all.
Well,
Okay, we'll come back to that one then. That's why we do first readings.
There you go.
All right, next up on the agenda is the sexual harassment in the workplace. There's a minor change on that one as well. Any discussion on that one? Open.
This is basically a model policy, right? That we. I think the state of New York basis is drafted.
So the changes are in blue, is that what we're looking at here?
Yes, and the strikeouts in red.
Yep.
Are all these changes the changes that were given to us by the state, or are they our?
By the policy services.
And I looked through it, I understood the changes. Opinions one way or the other.
I would suggest that we don't move forward on this one right away because of the sensitivity of the topic.
We don't, well, it's just first reading.
Well, just, yeah, it's a first reading and we can let it percolate.
Yeah, there's some minor changes, some wording changes. We had this as a policy before. I think we're just updating it.
Wonder why we felt it necessary to include everything in that.
I can tell you because I've seen versions of this policy in many settings that when the state of New York passed its own sexual harassment in the workplace law a few years ago, it also promulgated a model policy. And it required every employer to adopt a policy, and then it gave you, this is the policy we think you should adopt, or something that has every single part here. And so people just adopted the model policy because you had to include all of the components of the model policy. And I think this is virtually that. I mean, it's largely a mandated policy. And if you really want to have fun, take that Title IX policy that we just passed and compare it to this and see how different they are. And that's where our problems lie, right? We basically now have a sexual harassment in the workplace policy that is largely inconsistent with our Title IX sexual harassment policy.
I have a question for at the bottom where it says the first reading was on May 18th, did we
yeah,
make a
so we-
lot of modifications? And is this a second reading or a first reading?
Yeah, I thought we saw it at operations, but not here before.
This I believe is our first reading.
I
So
thought
we
so,
can,
too.
we can amend that.
So any discussion on that further, or should we just percolate on that one more time?
Percolate one more time.
Next up is the revision to the school start time.
So we just touched on this briefly the last meeting and thought we would put this on as a discussion item so we could talk about it a little bit more. Part of it is just to understand the rationale for even talking about this. We're not looking at changing the transportation schedule. So our students are arriving at a time and they're coming in very early. And then what happens is kids are, and they're coming in starting at 7:30. And then school doesn't start for many minutes afterwards. It's more like what, 8:10 or 8:05? 8:10 that it begins. So the students are, we're spending $82,800 in salary expenses for staff to monitor students in the mornings, both here and over at OIMS. So the elementary buildings, that's covered by the YMCA, the morning program. So we have to bring people in to watch because it's a safety concern. It more so than anything else. We have a safety concern where kids are getting here and school doesn't start for a while. So the idea is to take our bell schedule and our instructional schedule, move it back 20 minutes, the start time and the end time, not to change the length of the day, but just moving that back 20 minutes so that it's better aligned with where our students are coming in. So students who are being transported would not be transported at a different time. Doesn't mean for them the bus will be coming 20 minutes earlier. They'll be coming in the same time they're coming in right now, but we would be starting earlier. So what does it do for us at the end of the day? Well, we've talked about transportation here a lot tonight, and it makes a big difference for us at the end of the day. Think about our athletic trips in the afternoon. Sometimes they're not able to leave for those contests until after 4 p.m. because we have to wait for drivers to come back from the runs to be able to take those runs. And at other times, we've had to contract with outside transportation firms in order to take our students. This year, it's about $36,000 in outside transportation firms to take our kids because our drivers aren't available yet. So we would have, that would give us a little more time for those drivers to do their runs, come back, and then to be able to pick up an athletic run to take care of students going to their contests. So just by making that change, there's a financial aspect. There's also, we're not wasting kids' times where they're sitting around waiting for school to start. And we could go ahead and start the instructional day, and it also decreases the safety concern of students who are here before school starts. So that's the rationale and the reason behind it. We talked about it with our administrative team, and it was something that in each of our schools, it would work out well. We didn't see a lot of downsides about it, but that's the beginning of the discussion, and I shouldn't be the discussion, so I'll step back.
Is this basically for the high school?
Or is it district-wide?
It would be district-wide.
I remember having discussions in the past about actually having a later start time at the high school level, but this is a far cry from, we're going to start earlier.
Yeah, I remember around 2015 or so, there were a couple of research papers that came out, and they talked about how schools would be better if we had our high school students starting later and our elementary students starting earlier. And there have been a few studies since then that have shown different data, but regardless of a student in their own biological clock and when they wake up, we also have so many of our students that are participating in things after school, whether they're clubs, activities, athletics, and jobs, that to start later, that would preclude their ability to participate in sports without cutting into your instructional time, mostly because of the amount of time during the year when it gets dark.
Most of these students though that are getting here early, like at the high school, aren't being bused anyway, we just learned.
No, they are. Buses are getting here to the buildings at some of them as early as 7:20, but typically
But
7.
how many of those students are at the high school that are being bused? I mean, we're saying it's the high school and the middle school where you're saying you have the issue where it's costing $82,000 because Eastview and Washington West, we have the Y program taking care of those kids. So those kids getting to the school early really isn't an issue. It's OIMS primarily because the high school kids aren't being bused. So I guess I don't really.
Some are. Yeah, some are. We have a large
But how
amount of
many?
students, and the principals are in the audience. They can probably speak to it as well. We have a very, very large amount of students that show up to each of our OIMS and our high school extremely early. If you drive by the buildings, I know Mr. Tritley and Mrs. DeServo actually allow the kids to come in early because of inclement weather and whatnot. I mean, you go to that foyer area at OIMS in the morning, it's crazy. I mean, there's a reason why we spend almost $100,000 a year to supervise kids in 2 buildings.
But why are
prior
they
to.
getting to school so early? I mean, why aren't our buses getting them to school at the appropriate time to be dropped off at school?
Or,
I mean.
or conversely,
I-
aren't they still going to get dropped off early? I mean, if start time is at 7:50, are they going to get dropped off at 7:15? Do you really
I mean,
think
and
that
now-
7:30 is the time they're going to get dropped off regardless of when school starts?
Mean dropped off by parents?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, that's
why-
most
why
of
are
it,
so many
right?
kids
Yeah.
getting dropped off so early? I mean, why wouldn't we just
Part of
adjust
it.
our
Tell them to
transportation to
come
get
at
them to school?
7:45.
Parental work schedule.
I mean, yeah.
Some parents have to work and be at work at certain hours. And so kids arrive at school that accommodate parents' work schedules. But I have 2 questions about the changes. One that the consultants fed, which is, what's the educational purpose behind this, if any? And secondly, have the various stakeholders weighed in on the change, the parents, the staff, others? I appreciate the effort to save costs, but sometimes it ain't all about saving costs. It's about serving children that need meals, supervision, and a safe place.
That's a great question. And part of it is nobody wanted to go too far if it was going to be something not supported by the board, which is why this is being discussed now. But from an educational standpoint, what this will allow us to do in the high school is to have an extra Regents course available for our students who participate in CTE, which is a large number of our students. So I'm talking about our juniors. They would be able to take 2 courses then, 2 Regents courses before going to CTE. So there's the possibility of our students having a greater depth of transcript, of more students being able to qualify for advanced Regents diplomas. And that's one educational piece of it that I know the high school is very excited about, that they have spoken to staff about it. We do have some staff input, but they didn't want to, no one wanted to go out and start surveying parents and putting it out there until this discussion happened first. Because if it was, I gotta be honest, if it was a no-go, no one wanted to start that discussion and have confusion over what times people would be starting.
So how does that give them an opportunity to get an extra credit in? I mean, we're not extending the school day.
It would start the school day 20 minutes earlier, and their bus to BOCES doesn't leave till a
Exactly.
certain time. So they would have the opportunity to take 2
So
classes.
they would take a class here.
2 classes.
rather than
Right.
five
Are they
classes.
able to take a class now? I don't understand how we get 2 40-minute classes in and a 20-minute, we're moving it up. I don't get it.
It's a rotation.
Well, they already have time for 1 class. Now they would have time for 2 classes, right? It's not 2 additional classes. So right now you have time for a class and then there's a lot of time where they're not, it's like limbo time while they're waiting for that transportation.
So we're basically, this is about time utilization.
They got
And
1 class.
how-
They could take a second class, maybe. And now they're just standing around at the high school, waiting to get on the BOCES bus to
Right.
drive over to BOCES.
So what does this do to the end of the day? We're bumping up the end of the day too, or are we gonna add 2 minutes to every period?
No, this would be taking the entire schedule and moving it back 20 minutes. So we would be ending 20 minutes earlier than we currently end.
And how does that coordinate with the BOCES? I mean, did the BOCES bus come back in time for those kids to be here by the end of the day?
Yes, it coordinates with that schedule well, according to Mr. Andriano.
What about with the YMCA, because that's gonna increase the amount of time they are gonna be responsible for watching these kids after school. I mean, all the kids in the after-school program, they're gonna need 20 minutes more after school every day. I mean, and I would hope that they wouldn't start ending their
Yeah, the
program
YMCA
earlier than they
Yeah,
already have
it
it.
won't have much of an impact there because the YMCA employees actually start their day much sooner. Again, we haven't gone into great depth with anybody yet because we want to have this conversation.
So our elementary school starts at 8:10. So they would move back to 7:50. And the OIM starts when?
8:27.
8:27, so they move back to.
Is it 8:27? I'm looking at. 8:24. So think about those kids that are on that are on those buses, they're dropped off at 7:30 and OIM starts at 8:24. Now they have an opportunity to get breakfast, but that's a long breakfast.
So they're there for an hour, and then our high school starts at 8:15.
8:20.
8:20, okay.
Right, Jeff?
Is that right?
Yep.
I'd like to get some input from our students and our parents on this as well. I mean, because they're the stakeholders that are going to be affected. And I mean, if we're doing it for a percentage of the student population, what percentage is it? And how many of our student population and our parents are going to be against it because it's too early for them?
And have we looked at just making our bus schedule different so that kids aren't arriving so early on the buses? I
Yeah,
mean,
and the biggest impact is the students programming too, where this discussion all centered around is providing additional opportunities for those kids to have those classes in the morning. That's really where a lot of this started. But unfortunately, the way our schedules run, and we have teachers who teach in multiple buildings as well, we had to coordinate the change in schedules district-wide.
but if those students who are getting these extra classes in are really only at the high school level, and we don't bus the high school students to begin with, why don't we just change the bell schedule for the high school only?
Because when you have teachers who teach in multiple buildings, though, you can't change one. Like if you have teachers who teach at both Williams and the high school.
So
you
all of
can't
our
change.
schools have the same bell schedule right now.
No,
We don't.
no.
So then I don't understand what the difference between that.
So for instance, let's say I'm a teacher at Williams, okay, and I teach so many periods of phys ed at Williams, and then I go to the high school. The bell schedule is staggered slightly so that I have time to make it from my position at Williams to my duties at the high school, so they are staggered. But if I bump up the high school schedule 20 minutes, I can't teach at Williams as well. And keep in mind, there are still students who are transported at the high school. While the majority of them are not, we still have about 150 students at this building who are still transported.
Is that typical for most school districts to have teachers teaching in a middle school and a high school and switching buildings regularly?
Oh, yes.
It's a small district.
Yeah, in small districts, they're all in the same building. So
Imagine if you're in Central.
Aren't there some programs that happen before school?
Yes, there are. And Mr. Andriano has already spoken to the teachers who said that that would not be a problem starting 20 minutes early. I believe Project Lead the Way is one of them.
So the benefits are a savings, we're looking at a savings of 80-ish.
But I don't want that to be the main.
I know. But I wanted to, what are the benefits? And we don't have, hundreds of kids standing around for a half an hour, milling around smartly before school starts. We get them in front of teachers. The negatives are they're free to roam a half hour or 20 minutes early at the end of the day for a longer period.
We have the transportation issue at the end of the day too. That's a benefit where drivers would be able to come back. Right. There'd be more availability for the athletic buses.
So if we increase extracurricular participation at the end of the day, that could help too.
And are we guaranteed we can get those buses if we change the bell schedule? And they've committed that they will run those.
So this is all contingent on convincing the students that getting up early has benefits.
Well,
If
The
you
theory is
walk
they're
through the
here
halls
already.
at
Yeah,
Williams in the
they're
high
already
school
here,
any morning, you will see they're already up early.
So yeah, they're here already.
They're here.
So I don't have.
She's crawling in at 8:30.
I drop my kids off and I see Lily getting picked up. My kids are
Yeah,
already
we
at
can make
school
it
and
work.
Lily's just leaving.
I know it.
Get
That's
more-
right. That's exactly right.
Less milling around smart.
We're going to make sure that gets in the minutes about less milling around smartly. But what we'll do is we'll take this further and then start engaging those other constituents. And so it's worthwhile getting that feedback and starting to see where there might be some issues and problems that that would come up if we were going to do that. Well, it might also help us it could give us a greater sense of any other positives that might happen as a result of this too. But it does seem like it's worth the discussion, and now would be the time to start discussing it. We don't want to look into this in August, that this is the time to do it.
Have we looked into like other schools, the times that they start? I've always thought like 8:30 and 8:20 was kind of late to begin with anyways, but in all honesty, yep, most schools start around 8 o'clock.
And earlier.
And earlier. And earlier.
We have 25 staff members between Owens and the high school who are assigned to morning. 25 between the two buildings who are assigned to morning duties.
All right.
Or anywhere from 42 minutes to an hour.
All right, let's
Dr.
push
J,
forward.
Dr. J, if this is the time to talk about it, when is the time to decide about it?
The time to decide about it would be a few weeks from now. We start engaging in this conversation, and it's not a talk that goes on for months. This is the kind of conversation that we talk about. We do it very quickly because we're getting master schedules done. If there are going to be any other changes that we have to make as a result of either doing this or not doing this, we need to know that right away.
So any data that we do need to get, we should do it within the next 2 weeks. If we're gonna ask our students and or parents and or powers that be, what they think about whatever.
Yeah, I would suppose we'd be engaging them through Parent Square. It's a quick and easy way to do it, to put information out and to elicit some information back. If we have to have any meetings or anything about it, then we can mobilize that right away, but we'll work on that starting immediately.
Yeah.
Is this a change that requires board approval?
It does not. But of course it does.
Right. Okay, I think we're gonna push forward then and go to the public comment portion of our agenda. I'm just gonna remind everyone that the following are not permitted. The use of an individual staff member's name, comments that involve personalities, comments about the performance or conduct of individual staff members, comments about specific and or confidential student-related issues are also not permitted. We have 5 people signed up. And we're gonna allow 3 minutes apiece, which should get us our 15 minutes. Mr. Sherlock, you were signed up ahead of time, so I'm gonna have you come first, if that's agreeable.
By the way, Mr. President, do we want to at some point in time, change public comment regarding agenda items and revamp that or keep it.
Let's discuss that.
Well, the header, yeah, we'll look at that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Well, hey, if you can hear me, that's all that matters. We're having mic issues. I'm going to talk really fast, so try to keep up. So we had a presentation earlier about the special education programs. I was really impressed by that presentation at being able to finally have some highlighted information at how, for lack of a better word, deplorable we are. For example, my son has a 504 plan. It came to my attention when doing his plan at the end of the year. How many teachers signed that form and looked at me and said, your son has a 504? Yeah, your employees just looked at me and said, your son has a 504, very inquisitively. I said, yeah, look at the little dot on your screen, read it, you signed for it. That concerns me. It also concerns me that many of our students who have 504 plans and IEPs are not getting the required counseling pieces. That goes to your RTIs that he's talking about that we're not doing all that great in. When we are looking at implementing different programs that will actually, these interventions, they statistically and scientifically work very well. My son has ADHD. He has a reactive attachment disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder. Many times, if you look at the research in any psychological journal, these interventions work far better at deterring these kids from full-blown IEP programs than whatever it is we're doing now, which is not doing very well. We tend to drop the ball with our students going into 8th grade, which concerns me greatly because my son goes into 8th grade. Let's be honest, not many parents are a helicopter dad like I am. So that worries me. It really did worry me on that level, not getting the counseling components. One of the things I suggested and I look at is sharing our services, looking at community action and counseling centers to get licensed counselors in here, so not to overwhelm our guidance counselors. I hear that a lot too from when I speak to them. You know, we have so much going on because there are services that are returnable to us through the Medicaid program that we can utilize. Plus, a perk to that is with all the violence we've been seeing, we will have licensed trained professionals in here who can start doing some better assessments and looking at why do students have so many high rates of disciplinary issues, who are our targeted children in that demographic. So it's twofold. I think it will help with a lot of initiatives and moving forward for our students. And I really do kind of like the idea of looking at more inclusiveness with our special education programs and our general education programs. How to do?
Good, perfect.
There you go.
Thank you. All right, next up, we have 4 people that signed up to speak about safe spaces, LGBTQ and racial issues. So we're gonna get through those here. The first person I had signed up was Lakia Mall. Did I say that right? I may have not. And they may have abandoned us at this point. No? Okay. All right. Then I have a Lily Ketry. No? All right. Cassidy Catcher? No? Okay. Desiree Muir? No? Everybody left? All right. Yeah, I know. We're dragging here. I agree. Okay, committee reports. The school health team met on May 12th. Any discussion on that report there? No? Okay. Moving on. So the board report. What I have to report is that our superintendent search has gone well. We've done 2 rounds of interviews. We've identified, they were all great candidates, I felt. We've identified a candidate that we've made an offer to, and we are negotiating back and forth and hope to have an announcement soon. Other than that, there was an item in the paper today about a charter school, which I think we should be aware of, that's possibly coming to our community. So if anybody wanted to have a little discussion about that, now would be a good time. That article was just in the paper today.
The only thing that concerned me about that article is that since the charter school said that they specifically were targeting instruction in STEM, that seems to imply that the district is falling down in STEM, and I don't think that we are, first of all, but I don't know whether they have any data to support the position or the need for a charter school that specifically targets STEM, although they also seem to want to target Olean's history and value-based education, and value-based education to me is kind of a red flag. But that's all I have to say. I think we need more information, but we need to be aware that this could be coming. And I think maybe we need to get out in front of this a bit and say, we don't really need this because we're already doing the job in STEM here. That's all I have to say about that. But we may need some more data from people like Jen Mahar, sorry, Jen, that to support that position.
I'm not against any type of additional education. However, Olean and its size already offers numerous educational opportunities with a couple private schools, public high school, online learning. Whether or not it'll include a charter school, that'll depend on the demand and how many students, and a lot of variations. I mean, there's been attempts at charter schools in the past, but we'll see where it goes.
So I think the question is, what would our role be as the Board of Education? I'm not sure if you can offer any input.
Yeah, so when that was brought to my attention, I did forward the link to the New York State Education Department's website on charter schools, and it talks a little bit more about charters in New York State and the two types of charters and the process. So what would happen for us is we would get a notification that a charter is being, as they're going through the process, that it's being recommended. There would be hearings, we would have some input on it, as would any other school district that would be in a catchment area. The catchment area, it's not just Olean, it's within 50 miles. So when there's a charter school within 50 miles and you have a student who lives in your district attending that charter school, then you're required transportation to send that student to that charter school. So it's not just Olean, those other school districts within that radius would also, only in New York State, would be a part of that process as well. We would all get notification from the state that it's being considered. And so we would get a notification of it and have an opportunity to provide input.
Yeah, I guess my feeling right now is that it's at the ideas stage from what I could tell from the article in the paper. And, you know, they've got a lot of work ahead of them to move forward from the idea stage, including deciding exactly what their, mission is, how many students they're looking at, what qualifications for teachers they're going to be looking at. I mean, none of these things are easy things they're all challenging. And so I think that it might be a bit premature. I think you sort of have to wait until kind of see how far it goes down the road. But I think too, and this is something I said 10 or 11 years ago when I was on the Allegheny School Board, we should be doing more to create school choice amongst the 4 or 5 public schools that are in our 50-mile catchment area. I mean, we could have a STEM high school that is, a designated STEM high school that is one of the 4 high schools, and we could have a An art school is another. I mean, that is, we could really, without having a charter school model, we could create ways for students to have a fair amount of choice about what their high school experience is going to be like by simply coordinating with the other school districts, which are within, 15 miles of us. And that, it seems to me, I mean, if there's a demand out there, maybe figuring out what the demand is, and can we meet that demand without creating, as Jim says, another potentially competitive school? I mean, we're all looking for students, right? And to lose some is not going to help any of the 4 or 5 schools in this area. So figure out what people are thinking is lacking, not a school, but what programs are lacking, and see if the schools that are here can provide those programs.
Ira has something to say.
Thank you, Julio. I'm somewhat skeptical here. I would engage this group in conversation. But I'm somewhat skeptical of the whole notion as to the rationale. I think Paul alluded to some of it. I won't go any further, but I would certainly hope at the end of the day, whatever the outcome is best for our children.
I think something that could be helpful would be to maybe have some form of informational meetings for parents so that we could make sure that parents are coming in and they know what offerings there are at a young level. I mean, as a person who has elementary aged students and I'm not in the middle school or the high school, I don't know what my kid has to look forward to. So from a younger age, I might be thinking, a STEM school sounds like it would be a great opportunity for my kid, and that they might have more opportunities if I were to start them there young. When in actuality, Olean School District might be able to offer more, and I just don't know about it yet because I'm not there. So I think to be able to get parents at younger levels some information about what your kids can get into and what their opportunities will be if they stay here in the Olean School District, I think that would be a lot more helpful. And I really do like Janine's idea about maybe trying to be more centralized with our own local districts and, have maybe an art district and a STEM district or whatever, if we could do that. I mean, that would probably be years down the road and harder to create than a charter school. But in the long run, to start at a level where parents know what they're looking forward to, and where you can even start with your kid at a young level and say, hey, if you get into this when you're in high school, this is something you can do. And we can look at, going into these more specialized BOCES programs and know what you're looking forward to. And even knowing, like, if we were to do some forms of, just surveys of what parents are hoping their kids would have, so that we can make sure our programming is reflecting that as they're coming up. If you know that you have, the majority of your students are interested in coding and things like that at a, already in 3rd and 4th grade, by the time they get to 8th grade, you could have those in place where those programs are available for them. So I think doing some research now of what our younger kids coming up want to see, we could just negate the need for a charter school in general. I think we're missing that.
That's a good suggestion. Thank you.
All right, let's move on to the superintendent's report.
Before the article came out, I just wanted to say that the Dream It, Do It Fair a few weeks ago, we had a number of students go there exploring careers and opportunities in our region. And we also received a note of thanks. And they complimented our students once again. That happens routinely here, but it's always nice to hear again. And I think they had a great experience while they were there. On a related note, we have programs that are back up and running with plans for more opportunities for our students in the coming year, especially with our partner JCC. We've been having meetings every month, and I know that Mr. Andriano and Mrs. Sodera have started joining those meetings too. They have some very concrete plans for various grade levels of getting to know what those opportunities are. Just this summer, they had a fabulous opportunity where Students not only are getting to take a course that would be tuition free, but they're getting paid to go. Doesn't get any better than that. But there are a lot of opportunities. They're just down the street. So you'll be seeing more of those things that it took a hiatus for a couple of years that are coming back in the fall, including when everybody goes to visit. I wanted to let you know about trivia in the cafeteria. Tuesdays and Thursdays trivia. We've got some great things happening in our OIMS and OHS cafeterias. I was down there today watching the first round of trivia, and there was a big sign, and some of the students weren't sure because it was the first time and what was this all about. They were just waking up to it, but there were prizes involved. The prizes include things like chips and ice cream and the kinds of things that kids want to win while they're there in the cafeteria. But you know, a lot of good fun and good things happening. Let's talk about school safety. I know that there have been some questions about school safety. School safety is something that we're not just looking at right now. We look at all the time. But whenever something happens, whether it's in the district or it happens throughout the country somewhere else, it is an opportunity for us to re-examine our practices. We, especially now at this time of the year, we're getting more strict. And we're not loosening up as the year goes towards the end of the year. This is the time that we need to be extra cautious. We know that as the sun comes down on our doors, that they'll start to swell. And when someone walks out, walks away, it might stay open. And we're aware of that. We're starting, our principals are going to be focusing in each of the buildings and reminding staff and reminding students, take a moment, make sure it closes behind you. Each and every one of us, we could have all the brand new state-of-the-art horns, whistles, and bells in school safety, but it'll come down to little things like that that will breach our security. So we're focusing in again on what our regular practice is, making sure that, you know, we love our parents, we love our community members, but no one comes in who is a visitor without proper authorization, notification from the principal ahead of time. Those kinds of procedures we're getting tight. I have been in conversation with our mayor. We have a meeting coming up this Friday to talk about coordination of resources, especially in a large scale emergency. And I've also been in conversation with the state troopers. We have looked again at our Knox boxes and our abilities for our Olean Police Department to get into the schools. Those keys are all up to date. So we know that they're not going to fumble, they haven't. Let's also remember that in an emergency situation, they'll break the windows open anyway. When they need to get in, they'll get in. I'm proud to say that we have a very close partnership. And not only are they close by, both the troopers and the Olean Police Department, but they're in our buildings a lot. They drive by when you have new officers, they're coming in, they're walking in, so they get to know the layout. It's not just a map. They know what it feels like, what it looks like. We're looking and reviewing all of our, like on the door here where it says odd, inside a classroom where you don't remember, am I in room 214 or is it 216? We have the door numbers on the inside. So if you have to report where you are, it's there, it's easy to see. Our windows are, a lot of those safety things are in place. We're reviewing them, making sure nothing has fallen off or so we're updating where we need to. Same with our emergency safety kits. We have people participating in Stop the Bleed training. I know you've heard some of that on the news lately. It is a part of our reality. And we'll have more opportunities in the future for people within the community to come to Stop the Bleed trainings as well. We're updating some of those other safety things like AED training and our resuscitation. Help me. What is that?
CPR.
CPR training. Good. We're still awake. And updating our list so we know who they are. We're providing the training. We've also been talking about CPI training and trainers within our schools and having 3 or 4 people who are trained that came out of an agreement, and also looking at some additional funding. So for some of those de-escalation skills, so things don't become an emergency if they don't need to. So there's a lot of that work going on. I just wanted to make sure that you knew of that. And the COPS grant, we had those monies that you learned about earlier this year. the request for proposals going out, and we'll be updating, getting more of the state-of-the-art technologies in our surveillance and our lockdowns, having the strobe lights so you don't have to worry in a very loud gymnasium on whether or not you hear that there's a lockdown or a lockout. Capital project. It's up and running. They'll be starting on June 24th. They're ready to go. As soon as we're done with school, they're starting right away. Kudos to everybody over at Washington West who are packing up, doing that hard task of going through and throwing out things they don't need and packing up what's behind. We're going to be rocking and rolling, ready to go. We've been meeting regularly with our team. Where we're still working though is on what's going to be happening with the field over at Olean, as that starts to go a little bit further on what mitigation measures have to be taken and what has to happen before we do any digging and replacing on that field. When we have the experts telling us exactly what we need to do and how much of it needs to be replaced, we'll let you know that. That's it's on its way.
So that'll be a discussion topic on building and grounds, and are we gonna get an update?
Yes, sir, it will. Definitely on buildings and grounds.
Is anybody coming for that special, or is it just we're gonna read the?
Probably not coming, but what we can do is share what we know so far from the reports. We just got the report back from Benchmark. And when I say just, that was last week, what, Thursday or Friday? Thursday we received it. And it's a 260-page report. We've gone through and have been reading it. But then it's not just the report itself. With it, we have to do some more digging, I believe. And do some pits. So what we've been doing is some hole boring. They're going to have to do some pits, they believe, to get a greater understanding of the area and what they need to do. So if that happens, now think about it. Right now, you could still use the fields. When we start putting those pits in, depending on, maybe even with one pit, you won't be able to have people use it. It'll be a safety issue.
Right.
We'll have to make sure it's fenced off.
So it's not a safety issue right now, but.
No, sir.
So then we have to ask a question, do we want the fields done on turf? Which is a greater, is it a liability or is it a safety issue?
Right. Well, that was the project, and that's what our voters voted on.
Yeah, but there's we'll talk about that.
Right. Well,
That'll be a good talking point, because we're gonna have to get some numbers on that anyway.
we will, and it might depend on whether or not we get some grants to help pay for that.
That too.
And that next round of grants closes on the beginning, the 14th of July. No, the beginning of July somewhere. So that's coming up. We have to apply for it right away.
Will we have more information on what's happening here in the auditorium and like our music rooms and all that? Mostly here. What are we doing here? Like what the plan is for this? Will that be at the next meeting for operation? Or I mean, buildings and grounds or?
Yeah.
We can do that.
Be electing one.
We can also take there. We have a nice, we received a nice, it's like a timeline, a work timeline over the next couple of years, and it breaks down every location.
Okay.
And, things will change as we go through the project, but that's where we are right now. Let's get that out and we'll make sure that everyone sees that.
Yeah.
So you know when things.
Right, because if we're finally at this point now where stuff's gonna start to happen, you probably have mentioned and talked to us about different things, but until it's actually happening, we kind of put it in the back of our mind or whatever, but if we're gonna be, doing some stuff, I'd like to know, because if not, we need to have some contingency plans in place if we can't use this place for a lot of things, like right now, what we're having right now, our board meeting. So that'd be good to know. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That's all I have.
All right, let's move on. Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? New business. We have an MOA with the administrators for the Juneteenth holiday next Well, yeah, next week.
So moved.
Thank you, Jim.
Second.
All right, Ira, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We have a declaration for the Juneteenth holiday in where the school will be closed.
Yes.
For June 20th.
So moved.
Thank you,
I'll
Mary.
second.
Thank you, Julio. Any discussion? This is mostly, this will affect the district employee, the central office employees.
Yes, and it's a recognition that we now have the agreement with all of our
With everybody.
employees. And it's also letting our community know and to expect that our offices will be closed as well as no students in attendance in school that day.
So do we have to do this every year now?
No,
Or
that's the-
will this be going forward? It will always be.
It's on the calendar in the future. It wasn't for this year. So it wasn't with all of our employees.
Okay.
So it is-
Right, we put it on the calendar last year. but-
Right, well, and we now have the agreements with everyone that this will be, so it's recognition that we're recognizing this as a holiday.
So we're adding this in our holiday.
Yes, sir.
pay time package, Yeah.
And so on the calendar for next
know.
year, it is a district-wide, we're
Well,
closed.
now it's-
Correct.
Okay, good. All right.
No. fine.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We have an MOA with the Teachers Association for the athletic director.
So moved.
I'll
Second.
second.
All right, Mary and Paul, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We are looking at the Summit Center contract with the attachment, the data privacy agreements on there now.
Yep, so moved.
Mary?
Can I get some discussion on that? Like, just like some clarity or?
So let's get a second.
Let's get
Janine,
some
I guess.
clarity.
Oh, second, yeah.
Thank you.
Now you
All
can-
right, go ahead, Julio.
I just want some clarity on it. Summit, what are we gonna be using it for, or
We're using this for some
Already using it
testing
right now.
for testing?
in special education, correct?
Okay.
So I noticed it looks like there's one specific student that it's being used for,
Right.
and it's up to 20 hours. Will they be testing more than 1 hour at a time when they do this testing? I mean, because I noticed there's some significant travel charges for this. Are there no other services we could find more local? I mean,
This is a necessity.
there's no other local businesses that do this.
No, this is
I
the
would,
group.
I would say if there was, we'd be using them. So,
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We are looking to approve additional insurance coverage for our special patrol officers.
I'll second.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Julio. Discussion here. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We have a contract with the administrators. Can I get a motion to approve that?
So moved.
Thank you, Jim.
Second.
Thank you, Paul. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We have a capital project change orders to allow the superintendent to approve anything up to $35,000.
So moved.
Thank you, Jim.
I'll second.
Thank you, Janine.
Don't you have that authority up to 50,000?
This is specifically with change orders to the capital project going
Okay.
forward.
Is it overall or is it per year or what?
It's with every, per change.
Per change?
Right.
Okay.
So if you had a $10,000 change that they had to do, it becomes a time issue instead of waiting until the next meeting.
It's 35 and up?
Yes,
Okay.
because if you go higher than that, then you have regulatory issues. So we're going up to what the comptroller recommends as an amount.
Okay.
I think Ira has something to say.
I recommend that superintendent, if they execute their authority here, report that to the board. So we're aware of all of the change orders?
So I've had a hard time understanding, Ira. You do receive information on all change orders. They'll come to the board.
Yes.
Yes.
Are we anticipating a certain number?
Every capital project has change orders.
Right.
If you don't have any, good job. But things will come up where they didn't anticipate. Things might be in a different condition than they thought at first. Sometimes it has to do with availability of supplies and materials. They have to go in another direction. There are a lot of things that'll necessitate a change order, but you will receive all the change orders and knowledge of it. This just provides your superintendent the ability to keep the project moving and not waiting for whenever your next meeting would be. Makes sense.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions? Now on to personnel. We have quite a few tenure. We're granting tenure, quite a few people.
They're ready.
Took us a while to get here.
Sorry
but-
you had to wait
yeah,
so long.
Took us a while to get here, but we're here now. So
Sorry.
first on the list is Laura Colley. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Jim.
Second.
Paul, thank you. Any discussion?
No, I didn't think Laura was going to be here tonight. She wasn't able to show up, was she?
Okay.
I'm still going to talk just very briefly about the time that I had in her classroom anyway. I recommend her highly. This is a teacher who's very engaged with students, who makes sure that everyone has a chance to participate in a classroom that is unbelievably neat and organized. And it helps to promote those kinds of qualities in our students when they're in the art classroom too. It's just a fun and exciting place to be in her class.
It's good to hear. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Congratulations to Laura. All right, next up, we have Jenna Hendricks. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mary.
Second.
Thank you, Janine. Any discussion here?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So this is not my first introduction to Jenna Hendricks. And I say that because there was some other school district where she worked and I happened to work. But I'll speak to her as a teacher here in the Olean City School District. If you don't like science, go in her class. She is so well prepared for a student coming into her class. She makes chemistry something that they just love. And that's not just students who are taking chemistry. Those were the students who were, was that an 8th grade class? Yeah, it was an 8th graders who were excited about chemistry. But that's what we want, because we want each and every one of those students then to take chemistry a couple years later. She loves her job. She makes that evident in everything she does. She's a great colleague and leader. And again, it's one of those fun places to be, and that's what we want to see in education. So I recommend her highly.
Favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Let's get Jenna down here and give her a certificate and get a picture.
Yeah,
Not in front of the screen.
Off to the side here.
Don't be shy.
Unfortunately, our pictures last time in front of the screen were way too dark.
Could you guys move that way just a little bit? Thanks.
Look at us. Look at our bags in.
Congratulations.
All right, next up, we have Jennifer Griffin in special education. Can I get a motion?
So
I'm going to take Jim and Mary for the second. Any discussion on this one?
yes.
Yes.
So when I was in Jennifer's class, one thing that you see is the connections. And you want a teacher who helps to make those connections, but it's not just helping the students to do it, it's in the matter of a conversation. We're touching back to, this is what you're learning in English, and this is what you're doing in math, and helping to connect the dots for kids who are sometimes struggling with connecting the dots on their own. And I want to say something about how she connects with students herself. It's with ease. It's a natural way of connecting and for kids to feel like they belong with each other, with the teachers in the classroom. And it's a sense of belonging that should be replicated in each and every classroom. It was very welcoming and just a comfortable place to learn. Even those cool chairs, those are pretty comfortable too. But so it's physically comfortable as well. She takes care of all of the needs of students, and I'm very proud to recommend her for tenure.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, let's get a picture with Jennifer. All right, next up, we have Cami Korzanuski in special education.
So moved.
Thank you, Mary.
Second.
Thank you, Janine. Dr. Neal.
Cammie's class, the one that I observed anyway, it's a family. And I know that this doesn't happen right away. It only happens with a lot of work, with working with students all the time to know that they're going to be heard, but know that there's a responsibility to being a part of that family. They learn together, they're growing together. She nurtures them both in terms of their social emotional skills, but clearly in their academic skills as well. And it takes a talented teacher to do that. And it was certainly evident when I was there. So it is with great pride that I also bring her forward and recommend her highly for tenure.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, let's get Cami down here.
Don't move. I got more.
All right, next up, we have Abigail McWilliams in the languages.
Oh, so moved.
Second.
Mary, thank you, Paul. I'm sure you have some comments.
I'll say them in English and not in Spanish.
Thank
So take what was happening at OIMS, move it up a couple of grades, and I could pretty much say the same thing. This is a classroom where it can be very daunting learning a new language, but this is a place where learning a new language is fun, and you get supported in learning that language. You get lots of opportunities to speak, which is something that I think we would all want to see in a language other than English. But it's a place where you feel comfortable in taking those risks. And you have a teacher who is going back on her experiences and helping to make that great connection with students by, I was listening to her talk about what happened when she was traveling and when she was in school, and that makes it just very real for students. They connect well, And of course, they're going to do muy bien as they're going on in Spanish even more. And certainly this is something that will make our students want to continue to study and hopefully study the language even beyond high school. And it takes that kind of a talented teacher to spark that love of the language. And that happens in her classroom. So I highly recommend her for tenure as well.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Abby, come on down. We'll get a picture with you too. And finally, we have Heather Reese in the elementary tenure area.
So moved.
Thank you, Janine.
Second.
Oh.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Jim, thank you. All right.
Well, who doesn't want a teacher who's also a very responsible parent? So we understand that she's not here. Again, what I'm seeing over and over again, and it has to be understood that our tenure recommendations, this is not just a function of time and the amount of time that you're spending in the district. That Heather, as well as our other candidates this evening, have demonstrated over and over again, not only the skills when they got here, but it's the continuing growth and development of skills. In her classroom, it's a classroom where students are, again, they're given that chance to take a risk, but in a supported way. They're not just taught by rote, but they're taught to think and to question. And that can happen at each and every level. So she has that same desire to get better as an educator each and every year. And I think that we'll see that with all of our tenure recommendations this evening. She comes highly recommended to me as well for tenure in the City School District of Olean.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Congratulations. All right, next up, we have a resignation. No, wait.
Nope.
Nope, we got to create a speech language pathologist position. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mary.
I'll second.
Thank you, Julio. Any discussion? This is through our ARP funding, so it's a limited term.
And we have the money. I mean,
We will.
Yes.
this is part of the. I know there are several streams of money, and this is one of the ones that we've already applied for and got.
Yes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Right now, we have a resignation of our community schools director, Nick Patron. Can I get a motion there?
Nope, he's gonna.
Nope, yeah, we're not gonna do it.
Don't get me in
So
trouble
moved.
with Nick, everybody.
Did I?
Yeah, with great regret, so moved.
All right, thank you, Janine.
Second.
Thanks, Jim. Yes, and I need to say that, you know, Nick has already retired once, and then he came back and he put in a lot more time, and we can't thank him enough for all that.
He's got a couple more years left. He might not.
He's done tremendous work for us. That's evident.
I'm assuming that this is then a vacancy that will be posted as director of community schools.
Technically, yes, not as a director per se, and the position has been as a program specialist, and that program specialist will also be posted or has been posted. Will be posted.
My only question would be, Was he hired as a director or as a program specialist?
Technically as that program specialist.
Whoa. That's news.
Sorry? Oh. But apparently each year at a reorg meeting, or when it, has it been at the reorg meeting? In June, that appointment is as you see here. So the last time that you had appointed him to that position, it was as the community schools director. So that's what he's resigning from here, is as the community schools director.
All right, any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Now we have a couple of teacher retirements. First up is John Zambanini.
So moved.
Oh, give it
Thanks,
to Ira.
Thanks, Mary, for the second. Discussion here. Just have to thank these teachers that are retiring for all their years of service, because they do put in a lot of time. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? And then we have Diane Franz, who's retiring.
So moved.
Mary?
Second.
Thank you, Jim. Any discussion here? Again, thank you for the years of service and all the work. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Now I need a motion to approve Angela Catone to a speech pathologist appointment.
So moved.
Thank you, Janine.
Second.
Thank you, Paul. Any discussion here? This is Olean who is retired. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Congratulations. Angela Catone. Next up, we have another speech language pathologist appointment. Can I get a motion for Marissa Magro?
So moved.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Jim. Any discussion here?
Is this to replace the
Angela Catone?
the Angela Catone?
Yes. Angela had already been appointed to this position, which was through the ARP funding. And so now she's taking that other position. This position is where Angela was.
So this is actually a third position, because this one goes through 26 and the one we just created goes through 24.
This one says.
No, her tenure would go through 2026.
But it
But
says the
there's
position will
only
only be
lasts
funded
through
till
24.
June 30th, 2024.
So it can, I mean,
So in anticipation of possibly another retirement between now and then, I would say, you know, we keep her on the tenure track.
I guess.
Yeah.
That's correct.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Congratulations to Marissa. Then we have an elementary teacher appointment, Shelley Baldwin.
So moved.
Thank you, Mary.
Second. Go ahead.
Good.
Janine? All right. Fighting over there. Any discussion on this one? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Congratulations to Shelley.
Shelley, want to stand up
Stand
or
and
wave?
please.
There you go.
Thank you. Congratulations. All right, we have another elementary teacher appointment for Aaron Martin. Can I get a motion?
So
Thank you, Paul. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Janine. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Congratulations to Aaron. We have another elementary teacher appointment for Olivia McWilliams. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
I'll
Thank you,
second.
Jim and Mary. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Congratulations, Olivia. We have a phys ed teacher appointment for Marissa Olson. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Paul.
Second.
Thank you, Janine. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Congratulations to Marissa. All right, we have a keyboard specialist appointment for Lisa Yingling.
So moved.
Thank you, Mary.
Second.
Thank you, Jim. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Congratulations go out to Lisa. We have a list of some summer school appointments. You can see the names on there. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mary.
Second.
Thank you, Janine. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? I meant to say thank you to those people coming to work during summer school.
Yes.
Thank you to everybody for staying so long.
I know.
Yes,
Seriously.
thanks, everybody. You can see the informational items on there. The meetings are listed for this month. If there's anything that looks off, speak now.
Do we have a tabs
Or later.
meeting in there?
We do.
June 15th.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's at 3:30, correct?
Correct, in the library.
All right, Dr. Dealing, do we have a need for executive session?
Yes, we do.
Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mary. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Janine. What's the purpose?
The purpose, we have repeat purposes.
Okay.
For the purposes of negotiations and for discussing particular personnel.
Personnel. Are we inviting anybody else in besides the regulars?
He's busy glad handing right now.
All right, we'll invite Mr. Wolf whether he likes it or not. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? It's 9:37. I anticipate no action afterwards. So let's adjourn to the boardroom and we'll get moving on that.
I got the mute button there.